Welcome to the July 2014 open meeting of the Federal Communications Commission. Madam Secretary, would you please introduce the agenda and tell us what we're going to do today?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioners. Today's agenda includes 3 items for your consideration. First, you will consider a second order on reconsideration and a second further notice of proposed rulemaking that revisits the Commission's determinations regarding the captioning of video clips when delivered using Internet protocol, ensuring that individuals with hearing disabilities are able to enjoy the full benefits of broadband technology. Second, you will consider a report and order establishing a budget and a methodology for selecting winning applications for the Connect America Rural Broadband Experiments, adopted by the Commission in the January Tech Transitions Order. Third, you will consider a report and order to modernize the E-rate program and expand support for Wi-Fi connectivity for schools and libraries. The report and order seeks to close the Wi-Fi gap, make E-rate dollars go farther, and deliver faster, simpler, and more efficient applications and other processes. This is your agenda for today. The first item will be presented by the Media Bureau. Bill Lake, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Lake.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Media Bureau presents today a second order on reconsideration that imposes closed captioning requirements on video clips that are delivered using Internet protocol. The item also includes a further notice seeking comments on 4 issues related to the closed captioning of IP-delivered video clips. One of the Commission's top priorities is to ensure that all individuals, especially those with disabilities, are able to enjoy the full benefits of broadband technology, including access to online video programming. The item we present today will help achieve that goal. We commend the industry for its ongoing voluntary efforts to caption IP-delivered video clips and encourage them to further these efforts in the lead-up to the compliance dates of the rules before you today. Joining me at the table this morning are Mary Beth Murphy, Steve Brockhart, and Diana Sokolow of the Bureau's Policy Division, and Jeff Newman of the Engineering Division. I would also like to acknowledge the great contributions of our colleagues in the Disability Rights Office, including Karen Pelt-Strauss, Gregory Leibach, Rosaline Crawford, Elliot Greenwald, and Susie Rosen-Singleton. Diana will present the item.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, we are pleased to present the second order on reconsideration and second further notice of proposed rulemaking in the Commission's IP closed captioning proceeding. In January 2012, the Commission implemented Sections 202 and 203 of the Communications and Video Accessibility Act of 2010, the CVAA, by adopting IP closed captioning requirements. At that time, the Commission applied its IP closed captioning rules to full-length video programming and not to video clips. A coalition of consumer groups filed a petition for reconsideration on this issue, and at the Commission's direction, the Media Bureau issued a public notice seeking further comment. The record that developed in response to the public notice supports the application of the IP closed captioning rules to video clips, many of which remain uncaptioned. A Commission requirement for captioning IP-delivered video clips will ensure that the content will be accessible to individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing. Consistent with the CVAA, the Commission's IP closed captioning rules will apply to video clips only if the associated video programming was shown on television with captions. In addition, our rules will apply only if the video programming distributor shows the programming on television and then posts a video clip of that programming on its own website or application. The order imposes different deadlines for 3 categories of video clips. The first deadline, January 1st, 2016, applies to straight lift clips. These are clips that include a single excerpt from a captioned television program with the same video and audio that was presented on television. The second deadline, January 1st, 2017, applies to montages. These are files that contain multiple straight lift clips. The third deadline, July 1st, 2017, applies to time-sensitive video clips, which includes video clips of live and near-live programming. The item provides a grace period of 12 hours after the associated live programming is shown on television with captions, and 8 hours after the near-live programming is shown on television, before the clip must be captioned if placed online. The grace period will give distributors flexibility to post time-sensitive clips online without delay. This is an exception to the general rule that video clips must be provided with required captions at the time that they are posted online. The order does not extend the IP closed captioning requirements to video clips that are in the distributor's online library before the applicable compliance deadline. Rather, the order finds that it would be economically burdensome under Section 202 of the CVAA to require the industry to identify, track, and add captions to the vast number of video clips already posted online. The order imposes on video clips the same quality requirements that apply to full-length IP-delivered video programming. Accordingly, the quality of captions provided online must be at least as good as the quality of the captions on television. We recognize, however, that providing captions for video clips may present certain technical challenges, and we will take these into account if faced with complaints. In the further notice, the Commission explores 4 issues related to captioning IP-delivered video clips. First, the further notice considers application of the IP closed captioning rules to the provision of video clips by third-party distributors. By third-party distributors, we mean those distributors that are not subject to the compliance deadlines of today's order. Second, the further notice asks whether we should decrease or eliminate over time the grace periods that apply to video clips of live and near-live programming, as technological advancements facilitate the prompt online posting of such clips with captions. We expect that technological advancements will eventually render the grace periods unnecessary. Third, the further notice invites comment on application of the IP closed captioning requirements to mashups. These are files that contain a combination of one or more video clips of programming that has been shown on television with captions, along with other content, such as online-only content, that has not been shown on television with captions. Fourth and finally, the further notice asks how the Commission should apply the IP closed captioning rules to advanced video clips. These are video clips that are added to the distributor's online library after the applicable compliance deadline, but before the associated video programming is shown on television with captions. The Media Bureau recommends that the Commission adopt the second order on reconsideration and second further notice of proposed rulemaking and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you. As Victor Hugo famously noted, there are few things more powerful than an idea whose time has come. When Congress passed the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act of 2010, better known as CVAA, it marked a bold step in ensuring that all individuals, particularly those with hearing disabilities, could enjoy the full benefits of modern communications technology. Our action today represents yet another step towards full implementation of CVAA. In reconsidering the Commission's earlier interpretation of the statute, we concluded that Congress intended the IP closed captioning requirements to extend to all covered video programming beyond television, including video clips. Among other things, Congress left it to the discretion of the FCC to determine an appropriate timeline for compliance with this requirement. This item accomplishes these objectives. As a prelude to where we are today, we must acknowledge that considerable work has already gone into developing a compliance regimen on IP captioning. Industry has sought to work cooperatively with key stakeholders and has achieved quite a respectable level of compliance in voluntarily captioning video clips. For these efforts, the industry should be commended and encouraged to keep moving forward. However, even with that impressive level of progress, it became clear that those with hearing disabilities were still not experiencing the full benefits that every American expects today. That is what motivates me to support this item. As our society moves ever steadily to an all-IP environment, we must be mindful not to create divides, even if they are unintended. After all, we will be remembered for our actions, not necessarily our good intentions. We should not and do not want to create a system where those with hearing disabilities are left to their own devices when it comes to their media engagement, even if that content appears in short video clips beyond the television platform. For instance, in emergency situations, we need to ensure that every member of the community has access to vital information. This item seeks to close that divide where it currently exists and attempts to make sure that such a fissure does not grow into the video ecosystem. And while it is not perfect, it will put us ever closer to where we want and need to be. I know there has been a healthy discussion concerning the recommended time frame for implementing this order, especially as it relates to the burdens and costs on video programmers for captioning montage clips. I am sensitive to the concerns of industry when it points out a need for more time, for it is clear that the captioning process in the IP framework is much more complex than captioning on video. But that alone should not be an impediment to full implementation. I am more confident than ever that industry's willingness to comply with this item is superseded only by its tremendous capacity to create and innovate. Therefore, I am hopeful that neither time nor technical issues will obstruct our march toward full participation and engagement by all Americans. I would like to acknowledge the concerns raised by my colleague, Commissioner O'Reilly, with respect to potential hardships on small broadcasters, however we may define small. I share those concerns, and I'm sure that there is no shortage of small broadcasters who are not as well equipped to tackle this requirement as compared to their larger counterparts. So I greatly appreciate the efforts by the chairman to address these concerns, but because we should all remember that there is a bottom line difference in the way small broadcasters and large broadcasters go about doing business. And we should remain mindful of imposing any additional burdens on those least able to shoulder them. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I want to acknowledge the patience, persistence, and perseverance of the advocates from the deaf and hard of hearing community. In the best and finest tradition of a participative democracy, they have pressed their case for full inclusion. Their nonstop efforts to sensitize those of us with different abilities to the day-to-day issues they face have been nothing short of heroic. And until we completely close these gaps, Mr. Chairman, our work is not done. I, of course, would like to thank the Media Bureau, the Consumer and Government Affairs Bureau, the Office of General Counsel, and my law clerks, Sharon Lynn and Laura Akadipani, and my advisor, Adonis Hoffman, for their hard work on this item. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. Commissioner Rosenberg.
Thank you. The future of watching video does not look like the past. Bulky television sets encased in walnut cabinets are no more. But even slim models with flat screens mounted on the wall are no longer the only game in town. Because we live in a world where screens surround us, multiplying opportunities for viewing anytime, anywhere. In short, television is changing fast. And as the ways we watch expand, the Commission must update its policies under the law. Here we do just that. Specifically, we modernize our rules regarding the closed captioning of Internet Protocol-delivered programming pursuant to the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act. In particular, we update our policies regarding what are known as IP video clips. This is a righteous nod to changes in how we watch. After all, the future of video involves a lot more than gathering around a television screen for programs of uniform 30-minute and 60-minute length. Those programs now get sliced and diced into abbreviated bits and pieces. The excerpts, or IP video clips that emerge, get posted online and widely viewed. It makes sense that closed captioning obligations follow. That means more video programming online will be more accessible to more people who are deaf and hard of hearing. That includes the 36 million Americans today who are deaf and hard of hearing, and the 40 million Americans over the age of 65 who experience varying degrees of hearing loss at some point in their life. So our actions today have my full support. At the same time, I appreciate that compliance with our new rules will take work. The law, however, charges this commission to be more than just a steward of the status quo. So I believe we can move forward, make progress, meet deadlines, and get it done. Finally, a special thank you to Chairman Wheeler, who has made improving closed captioning a high priority. Moreover, he has carried through on a promise he made to me on this dais just a few months ago when he said he would be the second vote for updating our captioning policies regarding video clips. I am grateful for his interest, but more than that, I appreciate the speed with which he leads the charge for change.
Thank you, Commissioner Rosenworcel. And, just for the record, I think we also heard from Commissioner Clyburn today a challenge for us to keep pushing the envelope on these issues. And
Terrific.
One of the things the chairman has to be able to do is to read the handwriting on the wall. I think I'm reading it. Commissioner Pai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to your efforts to get me a light bulb, I can actually see that writing.
I
appreciate that. So, yes, many thanks for that. Communications enables connections, and that's especially the case for Americans with disabilities. We are fortunate in that we live in a time when our society places a priority on technological inclusion. Today, accessibility is increasingly the norm rather than the exception. Credit for this remarkable development belongs in part to Congress and the FCC. In particular, the Commission has made great strides in implementing the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act, or CVAA. This law aims to make modern communications services accessible to all Americans with disabilities. I'm proud to have worked with my colleagues in a bipartisan manner to implement this important piece of legislation, and I remain committed, as my colleagues do, to seeing its promise fulfilled. Pursuant to the Commission's rules, for instance, full-length video programming shown on the Internet now must be captioned if it is aired on TV with captions. I applaud video programmers and distributors for their efforts to fulfill this requirement by making their content accessible to deaf and hard-of-hearing Americans. I also thank all of the groups representing Americans with disabilities for their work on these important issues. Without your efforts, we would not be where we are today. Credit for greater accessibility to communications services also belongs to the private sector. For example, by all accounts, an ever-increasing number of video clips posted on the Internet are being captioned on a voluntary basis. According to a study entered into the record by consumer groups, the percentage of IP news clips that are captioned grew from just 23% in May of 2013 to 57% in February of 2014. This means that the portion of news clips that are captioned has more than doubled in less than a year. And that is substantial and meaningful progress. And so I applaud in particular NBC, ABC, and Fox News, which have led the way and already caption the vast majority of their news clips. So, things are improving, and fast. Which begs the question, whether now is the time for the FCC to impose a new, one-size-fits-all regulatory mandate addressing video clips, one that everyone acknowledges cannot currently be met. And one might answer yes to that question on the basis of a detailed determination that the benefits outweigh the costs. But this item contains no cost-benefit analysis. How much will the Commission's new closed captioning rules cost? What impact will those costs have on consumers? And on the benefit side of the ledger, how many video clips will be captioned after the rules begin taking effect in 2016 that otherwise would not have been made accessible? The item makes no effort to answer any of these questions. I asked for a cost-benefit analysis, but it never arrived. High-level rhetoric and appealing slogans are nice, but an administrative agency's rulemaking process demands more. I'm particularly concerned by the item's potential impact on small entities. Rather than incur the cost of captioning video clips, they may stop uploading clips onto the internet altogether or may limit the number of clips that they post. This would reduce the availability of news programming online, an outcome that wouldn't serve anyone's interests. I therefore hope that the Commission will give serious consideration to any waiver petitions filed by small programmers who would find it economically burdensome to comply with our captioning requirements for video clips. My most serious concerns, however, are not with the rules that we adopt today. Rather, they are with the second further notice of proposed rulemaking. For example, the item requires internet video clips of live programming to be captioned within 12 hours of airtime and near live programming to be captioned within 8 hours of airtime, beginning on July 1st of 2017. But even though the Commission establishes this rule just today, it also asks in the same document whether we should decrease or eliminate those time frames. In other words, the Commission sets rules for live and near live clips, and before those rules even go into effect, it asks whether they should be eliminated or modified. This is odd. It brings to mind a regulatory merry-go-round where regulated entities are trapped in a never-ending cycle of notice and comment rulemaking, with their legal obligations a constantly moving target. One would think we would let newly adopted rules take effect and then assess the real-world impact before we decide whether to change them. This is particularly true here, given that the Commission's determination is that a 12-hour grace period is reasonable and appropriately balances industry and consumer concerns with respect to time-sensitive clips. But unfortunately, my modest request to study the rule's effects before proposing to change them was rejected. While I wish that this suggestion and others had been adopted, I do appreciate that some positive revisions have been made to this item since it was circulated. In particular, all tentative conclusions have been removed from the FNPRM at Commissioner O'Reilly's suggestion. Moreover, pursuant to my request, the item now includes an 8-hour grace period for video clips of near live programming and postpones the captioning requirement for near live programming until July 1st of 2017. This is an important change because it will make it easier for programmers to make time-sensitive clips available promptly over the internet. I thank my colleagues for incorporating this proposal into the item. Ultimately, these and other revisions lead me to cast a concurring vote. Going forward, I hope that video programmers will continue making progress in captioning video clips during the rest of this year and 2015. These rules, which will not begin to take hold until 2016, should not supplant industry's commendable voluntary efforts in this area. I also hope that the Commission will be flexible in implementing the rules that we adopt today. If technology does not develop as quickly as we might like, we should adjust accordingly. After all, if it were possible today for programmers to comply with the standards that we are adopting, our rules would not become effective in stages between 18 months and 3 years from now. Last, but certainly not least, I would like to thank Diana Sokolow, Michelle Carey, Mary Beth Murphy, Stephen Brockhart, Allison Neplock, Greg Kleibach, Karen Peltz-Strauss, Evan Baranoff, Rosaline Crawford, Elliot Greenwald, and Susie Rosen-Singleton for their efforts on this item. Your work on this and other orders have brought to life the promise of the CVAA, and you have the satisfaction of knowing that you are making this country a better place for those with disabilities. I'd also like to make a special mention of my former advisor, Jeff Newman, who contributed mightily to this item. I'm very glad that the Media Bureau is taking advantage of his many talents. I only wish I could say the same. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of our nation's 300 million citizens, it's estimated that between 35 and 50 million have some type of hearing loss. The Commission has recently undertaken a number of steps to ensure that more communication services are available to the deaf and those hard of hearing. I applaud the intent of these efforts to increase accessibility for this community. To begin, I start with the statute. I question whether the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act of 2010 provided the Commission with legal authority to promulgate these closed captioning rules for Internet video clips. I do not necessarily see statutory language in the Act to impose such requirements, especially when the CVAA is read in combination with the congressional committee reports that explicitly forbear from applying closed captioning to internet video clips. The FCC record also contains a significant amount of debate on this question, most of it arguing strenuously that the Commission is not authorized to do so. This, along with the fact that the Commission came to the same conclusion just a few short years ago, leads me to believe that the best course of action here would have been to ask Congress to clarify the issue directly. Instead, this order marks yet another 180-degree turn on its own statutory interpretation, diminishing the agency's credibility. I'm also troubled by the process used to get us here today, going straight to order after a mere public notice sought comment on a reconsideration petition. Taken together, this strongly implies an ends justify the means approach. Nevertheless, I have deep regard for the senators and House members who worked on this legislation, and I recognize that it was written in a Democratic-controlled Congress. For instance, Senators Mark Pryor and Ed Markey, who helped author the law, have formally stated that covering internet video clips corresponds with their intent. As someone who expects congressional intent to be heeded, I'm willing to provide a bit more deference than normal to these views. As such, I will concur on this part rather than dissent, as I know this issue will likely have to be ultimately resolved by the courts. Moreover, I believe the agency had an obligation to do a thorough cost-benefit analysis before regulating. This item should have established the quantitative effects on the deaf and hard of hearing community. It should have determined the actual costs, especially on American video programmers and distributors, of mandating the closed captioning of video clips at the same quality standards that we demand of television content. Keep in mind that these quality standards are even harder to achieve when they are captioning internet clips. And most importantly, it should have been determined beyond a shadow of a doubt that these rules would not have ultimately led to a reduction of video clips on the internet. If captioning expenses are too high, content providers will have no choice but to withdraw or remove online clips. This isn't good policy result for anyone, hearing impaired or not. But in the haste to regulate, the Commission did none of this analysis. I'm also troubled that once again the Commission sets compliance deadlines that are aspirational and not based on realities of technological development and deployment. This item repeatedly acknowledges that captioning internet clips is not easy, and no one can estimate with any certainty when better technology will be readily available. This is a precarious way to regulate. The Commission must learn that technology doesn't develop faster simply because the agency wants it to. Fortunately, at my request, the item includes a simplified process to ensure that if improved technology is not available as hoped, the compliance deadlines will be extended. It also reiterates that for those internet video players and applications that find compliance too economically burdensome, they can seek immediate relief from the rules while the Commission considers appropriate waivers. I'm pleased that the Chairman also accommodated a number of my other edits to help mitigate unintended consequences. For these reasons, I approve in part and concur in part, and I thank the Chairman and his diligent staff who went above and beyond to try to address my concerns. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. I have a statement for the record, as I do in all of the items that are before us today, and they're always before us, but we'll try and summarize and be much more direct. For far too long, individuals with special needs have been sitting at the back of the innovation train. They've been told they have to wait until technology catches up with them. Wait until we get around to it is no longer good enough. What we're saying today is that it's time to challenge technology, those who use technology, to solve problems up front. The number of U.S. households viewing TV programming exclusively online is poised to exceed the number of households who are viewing television only by antenna. Television news, sports, entertainment programming is already on the web. Now it's going to be available for Americans who hear with their eyes. We have dealt with this issue in previous proceedings for other types of content, and I would just reiterate something that I said then, and that is, this is just the beginning of dealing with our responsibility to make sure that individuals with special needs are at the front of the technology train, not the back of the technology train. And I want to join with my colleagues in saying thank you to the staff who have pushed this forward with dispatch, who have dealt with it responsibly, and have given us the opportunity to move forward on this important topic today. So thank you to you all. With that, I will call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Unless there's, and there will be a request for editorial privileges, no doubt, which are granted. And Madam Secretary, please lead us to our next item.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the next item will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. It is entitled Connect America Fund, ETC Annual Reports and Certifications.
Carol, thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I'm very pleased to present to you an item that launches implementation of next-generation rural broadband experiments adopted in the January Technology Transitions Order. These experiments will inform the agency's broader efforts to advance the deployment of voice and broadband-capable networks in rural high-cost areas, including extremely high-cost areas, through the Connect America Fund. The experiments will also inform the Commission's ongoing efforts to ensure that consumers everywhere can benefit from the sweeping technological advances occurring in the communications industry while preserving consumer protection, competition, universal service, and access to emergency services. The order before you today moves the Commission yet one step closer to full implementation of Phase 2 of the Connect America Fund. With adoption of this order, the Commission will, for the first time ever in the United States, use competitive bidding to award recurring support to serve homes in high-cost areas. I would like to acknowledge and thank the Wireline Competition Bureau team that has dedicated so much time and effort to crafting the item before you, led at the division level by Alex Menard with assistance from Chin Yu. Thank you to the rural broadband team shown on the screen before you, who have spent countless hours in a 5 North conference room debating and discussing how to get this done. We have worked closely with the Office of Strategic Planning and Policy Analysis throughout this process. I would also like to thank our colleagues in the Enforcement Bureau, the Office of General Counsel, the Office of Native Affairs and Policy, the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, and the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau for their many thoughtful contributions to the item. With me today at the table are Jonathan Chambers, Chief of the Office of Strategic Planning and Policy Analysis, Alex Menard, Deputy Chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau's Telecommunications Access Policy Division, and Ian Forbes, Attorney Advisor in the Telecommunications Access Policy Division, who will present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The draft item that we present to you today is the latest step in advancing the deployment of next-generation voice and broadband-capable networks in rural, high-cost areas of the country. Today's order adopts a $100 million budget for the rural broadband experiments adopted by the Commission earlier this year in the Tech Transitions Order, and establishes an objective methodology for selecting projects among the formal applications that we expect to receive. In the Tech Transitions Order, the Commission invited parties to file non-binding expressions of interest regarding the rural broadband experiments. We received over 1,000 expressions of interest from a wide range of entities, including electric utilities, competitive affiliates of rate of return carriers, wireless providers, and others. These expressions of interest have informed us as we finalize the details of how to implement these experiments. We appreciate the interest of numerous stakeholders and hope that many will take the necessary next steps to file a formal application in order to compete for funding. Final applications for these experiments will be due 90 days after the release of this order, with selection expected by the end of 2014. This order provides funding for 3 categories of experiments that will occur in areas where the incumbent provider is a price cap carrier. First, $75 million will be available for projects proposing to offer broadband service at 25 megabits per second downstream and 5 megabits per second upstream to residential and small business locations in high-cost areas. Second, $15 million will be available for projects providing 10 megabits per second downstream and 1 megabit per second upstream to high-cost areas. We expect these 2 categories will provide critical information regarding which and what types of entities are willing to build networks to rural communities that will deliver services that exceed our current performance standards. Third, we designate $10 million for projects proposing to serve extremely high-cost areas with broadband service of at least 10 megabits per second downstream and 1 megabit per second upstream. This dedicated funding will help inform future policy decisions regarding how to reach the most difficult areas of the country to serve. In addition to gathering information relevant to broader questions implicated by technology transitions, the rural broadband experiments will inform key decisions that the Commission will be making in the coming months with regard to the Connect America Fund. To implement Phase 2, the Commission will need to adopt rules for the competitive bidding process that will occur in states where the price cap carrier declines to make a state-level commitment. The rural broadband experiments will enable the Commission to test, in a real-world setting, key attributes of a competitive bidding process for recurring Connect America support. Specifically, the objective methodology for selecting projects adopted in this order will compare bids to the model calculated support levels for a given area. We require applicants to provide the total amount of funding requested, as well as the total number of locations they propose to serve, and we will select the most cost-effective proposals within each category. To ensure diversity among the rural broadband experiments, we set per entity and per project funding limits and provide a bidding credit for providers seeking support for a proposed experiment to serve eligible travel areas. We expect that this straightforward approach, combined with selecting proposals from 3 separate categories, will enable the Commission to fund a range of projects in terms of geography and technologies. The order also adopts rigorous build-out milestones and establishes an accountability framework to ensure Connect America funding is used for its intended purpose, to deploy robust networks to rural America. Finally, looking ahead to the Phase 2 competitive bidding process that will occur after the offer of model-based support to price cap carriers, the item seeks comment on how to create inducements for state action to assist in the expansion of broadband. Specifically, we are seeking comment to further develop the record on providing bidding credits in the Phase 2 competitive bidding process to entities that leverage governmental support from non-federal sources in order to create incentives for states to share financial responsibility for preserving and extending broadband-capable infrastructure. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Commissioner Clyburn.
Achieving universal broadband will not be easy. Although the private sector has done a commendable job deploying broadband throughout most of this nation, millions of Americans still lack access. But just as this country accepted the challenge and took on the responsibility of providing electricity and telephone service to rural and high-cost areas, we will not leave behind those Americans who today find themselves on the wrong side of the digital divide. This is the very essence of our universal service charge. When private sector efforts fall short, we act. Because absent a governmental role, too many communities will remain without. The FCC's 211 USF ICC Transformation Order adopted a framework to connect unserved communities. The annual budget for areas served by price cap companies is $1.8 billion a year, and the FCC wisely decided that areas eligible for competitive bidding will receive support for 10 years. The parameters we adopt today for rural broadband experiments should provide the Commission with valuable data to adopt final rules for the competitive bidding process. In many ways, this is uncharted territory. But I believe this is a wise course and is reflective of good governance to conduct the experiments and collect data. This data will help determine the best ways to provide as many Americans as possible with affordable, robust networks while maximizing each dollar of federal universal service support. These experiments will allocate the majority of funds on projects that will deploy networks capable of providing 100 megabits of capacity while offering service plans that provide 25 megabits of connectivity. Such connectivity could be life-changing. I am especially pleased that proposals should identify whether entities will offer a low-income broadband plan as part of their experiments and will make clear that once designated as an eligible telecommunications carrier, or ETC, the provider must offer Lifeline service. I also appreciate that the Commission expressly recognizes the need to work with our state partners to connect more Americans, for universal service is a federal-state partnership. That $1.8 billion of an annual budget, as sizable as it may be, is clearly not enough to connect all of those currently without access to broadband. We must take steps to leverage non-federal government funding opportunities with public-private and public-public partnerships and rewarding government entities that commit to match federal universal service funding is a must. So I believe that incenting states to match federal funding is a win-win, which will connect more Americans, ensure the most efficient use of our federal resources, and enable us to fully embrace the federal-state partnership envisioned by Congress in the Communications Act. While I would have preferred to include a bidding credit for states that would commit a match tied to federal funding, the record in response to the January further notice, while supportive of the concept, did not provide sufficient details to do so. I am pleased, however, that the item seeks comment on how to work with states and encourage matching of non-federal funding with bidding credits or other incentives in the competitive bidding process. All stakeholders should act upon this call and provide comments with specific recommendations on whether and how we should do so. Only by working together will we be able to make the greatest strides toward our goal of providing ubiquitous, affordable, universal broadband to all, and once again demonstrate that meeting the critical communications needs of our nation is job one. I wish to thank the dedicated staff of the Wireline Competition Bureau and the Office of Strategic Planning and Policy Analysis for their work on this item, and I must congratulate and acknowledge the hard work of Carol Maddy. I believe this is her first meeting as acting chief. Congratulations. And I have to acknowledge the very fine presentation by Ian Forbes, who we like to take a little credit for, because he was an intern not so very long ago in our office. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted you to know that.
Thank you. The record stands so informed, and Ian, that's you got some serious challenges, hurdles ahead of you now. Ian.
Not because you were in our office, but
Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Universal service is a cherished principle, but it is also a challenge. Advancing the deployment of voice and broadband-capable networks in remote communities can mean tough terrain, difficult weather, sparse populations, and all too real financial constraints. But getting rural, insular, and high-cost areas connected with modern communications is important. More than that, it's the law. Today we take a creative look at making sure broadband reaches rural America. We experiment, or more accurately, we announce rural broadband experiments. Specifically, we announce a framework that will bolster our ongoing work to implement the Connect America Fund by testing new ideas, for the delivery of communication service to rural America. Furthermore, we are going to use this limited experiment to test the broader use of competitive bidding in our universal service programs. So, I look forward to looking at the applications that come in. I am excited by the creative possibilities for service in rural areas. But most of all, I am mindful that we must learn from this experiment so that it informs our legal obligation to advance universal service going forward. Thank you.
Commissioner? Commissioner Pai, I might add that during your last set of comments, something occurred that you were unaware of because you were looking at your text, and that is that below your image was my name. And I would like to stipulate right now that that is a cause of action.
For you or for me?
Well, now that's the issue.
I should be so lucky to have someone so
Commissioner Pai.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I start, I cannot let it go unremarked that we have perhaps the most sartorially diverse table in front of us that we've ever had. We've got the bow tie, the three-piece, no tie at all, and, of course, capped off by our general counsel with boots. I mean, this is, Carol is bringing a real sense of vigor to the agency, both in terms of substance and in form. So, at any rate...
in our party, we call that vigor.
Right, exactly. Anyway, we to business. It's been almost 3 years since a bipartisan FCC refocused the Universal Service Fund on next-generation broadband rather than legacy telephone services. After many more orders and much litigation, we are finally beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Just last month, a unanimous commission proposed rules for the competitive bidding process for the second phase of the Connect America Fund. And today, we all agree that a test run of that process is apropos. By taking this step, we heed the sage advice first advanced by Giovanni Florio in 1591. Measure twice, cut once. As we measure, I am grateful to my colleagues for adopting several of my proposals. First, we structure the rural broadband experiment as a reverse auction, where winning bidders will be selected solely on their numerical score, rather than through a more discretionary and subjective process. Second, we recognize that effective rural investments require long-term commitments and offer support for a 10-year term, in line with the term of support that we adopted in April's 7th Recon Order. We can currently adopt a strong enforcement framework so that applicants will have every reason to follow through with those commitments. Third, we adopt a bidding credit for anyone willing to provide service on tribal lands, which we hope will induce many applicants to step forward and deliver high-speed, high-quality broadband to these underserved consumers. And fourth, we make clear that moving forward with these experiments will not slow down our review of rate of return universal service policies, such as adopting a standalone broadband funding mechanism. Now, that's not to say that I agree with everything in this order. I would have preferred to structure the auction in a multi-round format so that bidders could evaluate their competition and adjust their bids accordingly. Instead, we will have a single-round auction, which places the onus on bidders to estimate beforehand how much competition there will be and what to bid. We saw in the Mobility Fund Phase 1 auction the problems that a single-round auction can bring, with some winning bids garnering 10 times as much support as others got. I hope we don't repeat that outcome here. Besides, the Commission had proposed a multi-round auction format in the 7th Recon Order, and holding one here, it seems to me, would be much more useful in evaluating that proposal. Nevertheless, the perfect is not the enemy of the good, and overall, this item has my support. We could not have gotten here without the help of dedicated Commission staff. They reviewed over 1,000 expressions of interest in rural broadband experiments and incorporated the lessons from that review into today's order. The list is rather long, and so I'll include it in my written statement, but let me simply say for now, thanks to Acting Chief Maddie and to all the staff who worked on this order, and for all the work you do on universal service. The American public is lucky to have such dedicated public servants at the helm of this ship. Thank you, Commissioner Pai.
I was going to ask about Giovanni Florio. Was he a personal friend?
Well, he was not. I'm not that old, but I'm familiar with his work, Second Fruits, in which he made this famous quote, so for what it's worth.
The things I learned from you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and potential future chairman. When the Commission adopted rural broadband experiments in January tech transition orders in the FNPRM, I concurred with that part of the decision for several reasons. I was concerned the experiments would distract the Commission from completing the already overdue high-cost reforms, including establishing a Connect America Fund in rate of return areas and connecting unserved and remote parts of the country. I was apprehensive that experiments could be used as vehicles to reconsider the established structure and terms of the Connect America Fund in price cap areas. And I expressed skepticism about using funding from reserves to test out new policies through experiments or other pilot programs. Compared to what was discussed in January, the order adopted today is improved in terms of design and direction due to a great deal of hard work. Nevertheless, I continue to have some of the same concerns, plus a few more, so I must concur again today. Focusing on the positives first, the competitive bidding process is more objective than the beauty contest that some had contemplated. If there is merit to be found in these experiments at all, it is in further testing the mechanisms of auctioning support in high-cost areas so that we can finally adopt rules for the CAF Phase 2 auction to allocate support in areas that price cap carriers decline to serve. I'm also pleased that the experiments will be open to all types of providers and that the order renews our commitment to move forward with additional high-cost reforms in the coming months. On the other hand, I am troubled by several parts of the order. First, it adopts a budget of $100 million, which is at the top end of the range proposed in January. That is far more than what is necessary to run a simple test. Second, the order sets a minimum broadband performance requirement at the higher speeds levels than were proposed in the April Connect America NPRM, but that the Commission has not yet adopted. As I said in April, I'm concerned about increasing the requirements when there are parts of the country that remain completely unserved today. Third, I am still worried about the conclusions that may be drawn from the participation in these experiments. For example, if many providers submit bids, will that give the Commission confidence to move forward with the current plan for the Connect America Fund? Or will it be used to justify further increasing the broadband performance requirements or adding questionable new conditions? I was not here when the Commission adopted the 2011 reforms, and it may have done some things differently. But at this advanced stage, it is not appropriate to undo the policies and compromises that enabled the Commission to adopt a bipartisan reform order when the prior efforts had failed. We need to move forward, tweaking along the way if necessary, thereby providing certainty to all affected and interested parties. Our constant delays are harmful, especially for build-out, because they postpone desperately needed business investment decisions. Providers have been waiting for more than 2 years for resolution on CAF Phase 2, Mobility Fund Phase 2, the RAF, and a longer-term plan for rate of return support. Fourth, I am concerned about the ability to apply rigorous oversight over all recipients that receive experimental funding, including electric cooperatives. Encouraging new entities to enter into this business can put captive consumers at a fiscal risk. If the past has taught us anything, it is that running a broadband network, particularly in high-cost, low-density areas, is not easy. Fifth, I had hoped that we would use this opportunity to begin spending down some of the reserved fund which could help mitigate USF fee increases. As an initial step, I would have focused on the balance of the unallocated funding, approximately $120 million, but that idea was rejected. We can devote $100 million from reserves to experiments and $2 billion from reserves to create a new Wi-Fi program. Yet we can't find any amount to reduce the contribution burden on ratepayers. In 2011, the Commission said that reducing the contribution burden was an option. It's time to start exercising that option. Finally, while I continue to question the value of the experiments, I appreciate the Chairman and the staff were able to accommodate several of my suggestions, especially on the issue of cybersecurity. Information sharing is one thing, but imposing cybersecurity requirements and selecting funding recipients based on those requirements is not something the Commission should do or has the authority to do. These experiments must not be a backdoor way to regulate on cybersecurity. Specifically, I am pleased that we agree Commission staff may not examine recipients' networks or practices for cybersecurity risks or impose any cybersecurity requirements during the process. While I am only able to concur with this item, I still hope we can wrap up these one-time only experiments and quickly press forward with the remaining Connect America Fund reforms. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. In a world of fast-paced technological change, we have the responsibility to ask whether new technologies can do old responsibilities better, and whether new processes, such as auctions, can improve the manner in which we go about our business. And that's what we're doing. With this decision, we will begin to select and fund trials of new approaches to the familiar problem of broadband connectivity. Now again, I don't know about Giovanni Florio, but I do know that any business starts with a trial before going to scale. And that's what we're doing here today. It is the responsible, cost-effective way to push the edges of the envelope to meet our responsibility for universal service. I want to join with my colleagues in thanking all the staff, Carol and the team that put this together, but particularly Jonathan Chambers, who has been a champion of this concept and who has been its advocate throughout this entire process, pushing to get us to this day. And so let's now call for the vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. The request for editorial privileges is granted. Madam Secretary, next act, please.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the final item will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau and is entitled Modernizing the E-Rate Program for Schools and Libraries.
Here comes the team. Here for a return engagement is Carol. And we turn it back over to you.
Actually, we're going to start off with John.
Start off with John. Making his rookie appearance at the plate, John Wilkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, look at that. The guy brought his own cheering section. Well deserved.
Good morning. Carol Trent and the Wireline Competition Bureau team will present the next item, but before they did that, I just wanted to take a few minutes to recap some of the important E-rate administrative improvements that we've been working on and that will complement, enhance, and strengthen the reforms adopted here today. As you know, last July the Commission began the first comprehensive review of the E-rate program since its creation and original implementation. The Commission did not just look at rule changes, and since that time, Commission staff has been conducting a top-to-bottom administrative review of the program, and I just wanted to highlight 3 achievements of that work so far. First, as part of that process, earlier this year, we've specified $2 billion in already collected funds that can be freed up from existing reserve accounts and put to work immediately for America's schools and libraries. We remain on track to free that additional funding for funding years 2015 and 2016, and today's order will in fact apply that down payment to help get Wi-Fi connectivity to 20 million students over the next 2 years. Second, my team in the Office of Managing Director and I have been working closely with the Universal Service Administrative Company, USAC, to dramatically speed the processing of applications, beginning with this funding year, with the current 2014 funding year, particularly for broadband applications. As of yesterday, USAC had issued more than $1.5 billion in funding year 2014 commitments, and of that, almost $1 billion committed to broadband projects. Just as some contrast, at this same point last year, funding year 2013, less than $270 million had been committed in total, and less than $115 million of that was for broadband projects. So in other words, we've committed over 5 times more funding overall compared to last year, 8 times more broadband funding. And these are dramatic improvements. We've heard directly from the program's beneficiaries that they're making a big difference in budgets and planning for schools and libraries across the country. And really a special thank you to USAC, its management, staff, board of directors for working with us for these accomplishments so far. But we are not going to rest on those laurels. USAC and the FCC are going to continue to work together to move even faster next year as we implement the reforms today. Finally, a few weeks ago, I signed a MOU with the General Services Administration, the GSA, to partner with GSA to deliver to schools and libraries the opportunity to leverage their joint purchasing power, save significant money on wireless access points, routers, and other equipment that they need to deploy modern, robust Wi-Fi networks. And we will make this opportunity available to E-rate applicants as part of funding year 2015. So with those 3 administrative updates, I'll turn over to Carol, Acting Chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau, to introduce members of our team who will present the item.
So, today, the Wireline Competition presents to you a report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking to modernize the schools and libraries' universal service support mechanism known as the E-rate. Since 1998, the E-rate program has provided financial support to schools and libraries in every state and territory in our country to assist them in securing affordable internet connectivity and related services. Last July, the Commission began the first comprehensive review of the E-rate program since its implementation. The Commission adopted a notice of proposed rulemaking aimed at ensuring affordable access to high-speed broadband, maximizing the cost-effectiveness of E-rate funds, and simplifying the E-rate program for all stakeholders. The order before you today is the next major step in a comprehensive modernization of the E-rate program. The reforms discussed in this order were developed and refined by Bureau Chief Julie Veach, who's happily on vacation, the WCB team working closely in coordination with staff from the Commission's Office of Strategic Planning and Policy Analysis, the Office of General Counsel, the Office of Managing Director, the Office of Native Affairs and Policy, and the Enforcement Bureau. As shown on the slide displayed on the team, I'd like to acknowledge the dedicated and tireless work of the E-rate team as well as those at the table with me. Joining me and John Wilkins at the table are again Chief of the Office of Strategic Planning, Jonathan Chambers, the agency's Director of Digital Learning, Michael Steffen, Associate Bureau Chief in WCB, Trent Harkrader, and from our Telecommunications Access Policy Division, Deputy Chief Lisa Hone and Attorney Advisor Kate Dumichel, who will present the order. Kate?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking before you today takes steps to modernize the E-rate program, which has successfully helped schools and libraries get access to modern communication networks for the last 17 years. Today, digital learning technology is opening up vast new educational opportunities for students, teachers, and library patrons. But unfortunately, nearly 60% of schools have inadequate Wi-Fi networks to harness the full value of these 21st century educational tools. Under the current program structure, no E-rate support was available for Wi-Fi networks last year, and in previous years, support reached only a small fraction of our nation's schools and libraries. The order updates the program to immediately begin providing schools and libraries support for broadband connectivity in the areas they need it most, namely Wi-Fi networks, in order to connect more students and library patrons. The item establishes clear goals and measures for the program. First, ensure affordable access to high-speed broadband sufficient to support digital learning in schools and robust connectivity for all libraries. Second, maximize the cost effectiveness of spending for E-rate supported purchases. And third, make the E-rate application process and other E-rate processes fast, simple, and efficient. The order adopts several reforms in furtherance of each of these goals. The order sets an annual target of $1 billion to test a more equitable approach to funding Wi-Fi networks in our schools and libraries over the next 2 years. At the same time, the order ensures adequate funding for broadband connectivity to schools and libraries. It provides a multi-year budget for schools and libraries and sets the maximum program match for applicants purchasing internal connections at 15% to promote cost-effective decision-making and ensure greater access to support. In order to focus E-rate support on the high-speed broadband connectivity needed for digital learning, the order also reorients the structure of the program by phasing down support for voice services and removing support for other legacy non-broadband services. To make E-rate dollars go even farther, the order adopts transparency measures to provide applicants with the pricing and connectivity data needed to make smart purchasing decisions, encourages consortia purchasing to drive down prices, and ensures that applicants are selecting from the best possible bids through the lowest corresponding price rule. The order also makes several changes to help make the E-rate processes faster, simpler, and more efficient for all stakeholders. First, it streamlines the application process by simplifying the review of multi-year contracts, expediting small-dollar cost-effective applications, speeding review of all applications, requiring electronic filing, and enabling direct connections between schools and libraries. The order simplifies the discount rate calculation by moving to a district-wide discount rate, updating the definition of rural, and addressing changes to the National School Lunch Program, or NSLP. The order also permits direct invoicing by schools and libraries. To gather data on and improve connectivity in tribal schools and libraries, the order creates a tribal consultation, training, and outreach program. Finally, the order furthers efforts to protect against waste, fraud, and abuse by extending the document retention deadline from 5 to 10 years and ensuring that auditors can access applicant premises. In addition to the actions taken in the order, the further notice seeks additional comment on the next steps that should be taken to further each of the E-rate program goals, as well as on several discrete questions related to the long-term program funding needs, multi-year contracts, NSLP data, and consortia participation. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges.
Thank you, Kate. Commissioner Clyburn.
I have to appropriate a bit something that my colleague to the right said a few moments ago. While perfection may be the enemy of the good, some may question whether this item rises to that level. It certainly is not perfect, and there are key aspects I would have approached differently. But the order makes a number of improvements that streamline and modernize the E-rate program, and at the end of the day, that is good. To say that there has been lively debate leading up to today's meeting is an understatement. But I fear some may have lost sight of the forest for the trees. If my sister, a middle school teacher, read only the press coverage over the last few weeks, I am not quite sure that she would have a full appreciation of why we are here today. For what gets lost in all the talk about numbers, per square foot budgets, and list of services, some which may require a dictionary to decipher, is how this item could improve my sister's ability to teach her students at Dent Middle School, or how our local library could better serve the community. Setting aside all the rhetoric, this item is fundamentally about the educational forest surrounding our children and their communities. It is about ensuring that our youth have the tools needed to be the leaders of tomorrow. It is about providing our country with the means to be an enabler of excellence. It is about breaking down barriers of poverty and demographic differences through our schools and libraries by making sure they have access to world-class broadband and Wi-Fi. This is why we have E-rate, And because of those visionaries in Congress, including Senators Rockefeller and Markey and former Senator Snowe, many of our schools and libraries, particularly in rural and high poverty areas, have the world-class technology they need to succeed. For me and so many others, broadband is the greatest equalizer of our time. It has the power to break down decades of barriers and provide children from Moncks Corner, South Carolina, Mr. Chairman, to Tyson's Corner, Virginia, with access to many of the same world-class digital learning tools they will need to thrive. But the fact is that the schools and libraries in Moncks Corner don't have the same means or resources as those in Tyson's Corner. And absent the FCC's E-rate program, schools and libraries in rural and higher poverty areas will likely not even begin to have the means to purchase high-capacity, robust broadband for and within their learning centers. I've seen and spoken about how robust connectivity and one-to-one initiatives can transform communities from Loris Elementary in South Carolina to Muir Middle School in South Central Los Angeles, and this is why we are here. We are here because we would be derelict if we leave our most vulnerable children and communities without the infrastructure they need to be successful. And while today's item does not make all of the changes necessary to achieve each and every goal, it does make noteworthy steps in the right direction. I noted from the start that in my opinion, this item is not perfect. At this juncture, I wish to highlight what's good. Although many of the schools and libraries have sufficient capacity to the building, some cannot take full advantage of that capacity because they do not have the resources to purchase internal Wi-Fi connections. This item's approach to closing this gap is not necessarily the one I would have taken, and I must admit, I have reservations about a per student or a per square foot matrix to allocate support. I would have preferred a narrower framework grounded on the needs of the community and taking into account the gaps that exist in the highest poverty centers. But I appreciate so much the chairman's willingness to address those concerns by increasing the per square foot allocations for libraries to $2.30, raising the school and library floor, and adjusting the discount for Category 2 services to 85% for the highest poverty schools. These changes make me more comfortable with this approach as an initial step to close the gaps. Second, the item phases out or eliminates support for certain services. This is a step in the right direction because we must continue to update services eligible for support and focus foremost on broadband and connectivity. E-rate funds are finite, so funding should be directed only to those services that are enablers of a robust broadband infrastructure. But when we make changes, no matter how sound, there are impacts to stakeholders, and I was concerned about the effects these changes would have on our most vulnerable schools and libraries, which serve high poverty areas where buildings are often old and budgets are almost always tight. I wondered if they would have enough time to adjust because abrupt, significant changes could bring them disproportionate harm and result in districts cutting teachers or other essential services. Staff's projections indicate that over the next 2 years, the new funding for Wi-Fi should more than offset the reduction in voice and legacy service for those schools and libraries. The Wi-Fi support in Category 2 will largely be new funding for these learning centers and will enable the purchase of high-quality Wi-Fi on par with our country's most wealthy school districts. After 2 years, the Bureau will report on the impact of the phase down of voice services to help ensure that these projections were accurate. Third, the order significantly increases transparency, which is good, and will not only help the FCC, but also schools and libraries. Learning centers will be able to compare their prices to what their neighbors receive and question if and why their rates differ. This will provide us with useful data and help us to monitor the program as we make sure that each dollar going to E-rate is maximized. Fourth, the item takes initial steps to streamline and reduce administrative burdens and leaves room for us to evaluate and introduce additional steps. But the promise of robust Wi-Fi will only become a reality if schools and libraries have adequate connectivity to their buildings. In the beginning, I must admit, I was concerned that Wi-Fi connectivity could negatively impact the Priority 1, now Category 1 funding base. But the item makes clear that the Category 2 funding for Wi-Fi will not be prioritized over the Category 1, over funding for Category 1 support. However, I do not believe this change alone is quite enough. The staff analysis shared with my office indicates that only 20% of our nation's libraries have fiber. And while I will admit that we may need more data, and perhaps not all libraries need fiber, I certainly believe that more than 20% of our libraries are in need of such capacity. The number of schools that have fiber is significantly higher, but even those numbers are not ideal, I am afraid. So our work is not done, and we will continue to contemplate how to close these gaps and ensure that all schools and libraries have affordable access to the connectivity to and within their buildings. Now I end as I began, asking rhetorically, why are we here? We are here because there are a number of positive directives in this order that will help our children and our communities. And as Benjamin Franklin said, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for working with my office to address our key concerns. I thank you, Commissioner Rosenworcel, for your passionate advocacy that goes back to your days as a staffer on the Hill. And many thanks, of course, go to the incredibly dedicated and overworked staff of the Wireline Competition Bureau, the Office of Managing Director, the Office of Strategic Planning Analysis, and let me point out a couple of people here today. Jonathan Chambers, I thank you. I won't share with you what your nickname is. It might embarrass you. John Wilkins, I won't embarrass you today, but I will thank you. Lisa Horn, who makes even the toughest times more pleasant. And Trent Hartraker, thank you. You make the toughest times even tougher. But and to my law clerks, Adrian Pegues and Laura Akadepani, I must thank you all also, but last and certainly not least, to my fatigued and ever dedicated wireline advisor, Rebecca Goodhart. I thank you for your advice, your wise counsel, and your dedication to this agency's mission and for the people we serve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner, for those thoughtful comments. And for those taking notes, Monk's Corner is spelled M-O-N-C-K-S.
Yes.
Commissioner
Don't ask me why.
I did not know that. Today, we start the process of rebooting, reinvigorating, and recharging the E-rate program. E-rate is the nation's largest education technology program. It has a proud history, and if we do our part here at the Commission, I think it can have an even brighter future. But before heading boldly into the future, let me take a moment to look back. I want to talk about when I was in school. When I went to school, there was only the blackboard. This was our common medium, our shared platform for knowledge. Introducing new ideas involved no graphics, gamification, or video, just the swipe of an eraser and some dusty chalk. There was also the mimeograph or ditto machine. Tests and math sets were printed out in a blotchy purple ink. That ink had a smell today that I would recognize in an instant, and apparently some of my colleagues too. There was also the great heft of biology textbooks and stubby guides covering grammar. They weighed down your backpack and they cluttered your locker. And beyond books, multimedia just meant grainy film strips with history reenactments that had really lousy production values. So fast forward to the here and now. Clapping together erasers is a lost art that my school-age children, blissfully, will never know. That purple ink has been replaced by the infinite capacity of digital distribution. And texts are being remade and rethought as tablets change the ways we access all forms of media and information in schools, in libraries, and beyond. In short, broadband and connected devices are changing every aspect of our lives because we live in an age of always-on connectivity. Increased broadband capacity and decreased costs of cloud computing are changing the ways we access and create content. So many of our social spaces are now virtual, and mobility means we can take that content with us wherever we go. So we are kidding ourselves if we believe that all of this change stops at the school doors. It does not. So if we are smart, we will let it in and we will wrestle with its real potential and do good things. Because doing anything else will not prepare our students for the world they live in. Already today, 50% of jobs require some level of digital skills. By the end of the decade, that number is 77%. We do our students no favors when we strand schools, classrooms, and libraries in the industrial era. After all, we live in the digital age. So we need an E-rate program designed for the digital age. We need E-rate 2.0. Now, the E-rate program was launched 18 years ago. It was the brainchild of Senator Jay Rockefeller, then Senator Olympia Snowe, and then Congressman, now Senator Ed Markey. Their work was visionary because at a time when internet access meant no more than dial-up, they saw the future. They sought to connect all of our schools and libraries to the internet. They understood that every student, no matter who they are or where they go to school, should have access to the bounty of the information age. They dreamed up the E-rate, and in the Telecommunications Act of 1996, they made it the law of the land. So thanks to their good work, we now have more than 95% of classrooms in this country connected to the internet. But the challenge is no longer connection, it's capacity. Because too many of our schools and libraries that rely on E-rate, often in low-income and rural communities, access the internet at speeds as low as 3 megabits. That's lower than the broadband speed of the average American home, but has 200 times as many users. Think about what that means. It means too many schools do not have the capacity to offer high-definition streaming video. It means too many schools are unable to take advantage of the most innovative digital teaching tools. And it means too many students are unable to develop the science, technology, engineering, and math skills, or STEM skills, that are so essential to compete. So, how do we fix this? A year and a half ago, I decided to get out of Washington and ask those on the front lines of our nation's schools and libraries. I spoke with teachers, librarians, superintendents, school administrators, mayors, and state leaders from across the country, from Alaska to Arkansas, from Colorado to California, and too many other places in between to count. Lots of different places, lots of different ways of doing things. But from every encounter, the same message. E-rate is essential. It can be the foundation for digital age opportunity, but it needs a reboot for 21st century success. So to get there, I think we need to do 3 things. So here are the S's of E-rate reform: speed, simplify, and spending smart. These are the criteria, and here are my thoughts on what we do today. First, speed. If you're a school and want to run the most up-to-date educational software, you need high-speed, high-capacity broadband. To do this, we need goals. So today, I am pleased that we put them in place. In the near term, we want to have 100 megabits per 1,000 students to all of our schools. And over the longer term, we want to have 1 gigabit per per 1,000 students to all of our schools. Of course, we also need to set targets for libraries that are on par with these goals. I like to think of these goals as dream likely and then dream big. I think we can do it. And more than that, I think if we adopt these capacity goals, we will send a strong signal to educational markets. Because by making more bandwidth available at nationwide scale, we can foster new opportunities for creative content, services, teaching tools, and devices everywhere. Our order today recognizes that to meet these goals, we are going to have to do things differently. That means that the Commission needs to collect better data from each of our applicants about what capacity they have and what capacity they need. That way we can fine-tune our efforts over time to achieve our goals. Today, we also recognize that we have moved from a world where a connected computer lab down the hall is nice to have to a world where high-speed broadband to the classroom is need to have. As a result, and thanks to the chairman, a centerpiece of our effort here involves Wi-Fi. Over the next 2 years, we will test out a new way to distribute funding for internal connections to support Wi-Fi connectivity in classrooms and libraries. This will support more individual device usage and help set our schools up for a new era of possibilities with one-to-one device learning. So bringing more Wi-Fi to schools and libraries is a good thing. However, I am mindful that any efforts to make Wi-Fi more broadly available cannot come at the expense of E-rate funding that keeps schools and libraries connected to basic broadband. So I thank my colleagues for agreeing with me that all requests for connectivity to schools and libraries under Priority 1 or Category 1 will be honored before Wi-Fi funding is made available. This is important. Second, simplify. I think we can agree the E-rate program is too complicated. This is a program that can be about blazing a path for broadband in the digital age. So why does it have such a long and messy paper trail? It's become too difficult and expensive for schools and libraries to navigate our process, discouraging some low-income and rural communities from participating. And that's not right. But today we do something about it. We take steps to reduce the bureaucracy associated with E-rate. We put in place a streamlined application process for multi-year contracts. We speed review of consortia applications, and we eliminate unnecessary requirements. This is good. The last S or two is spending smart. We need to spend our limited E-rate dollars intelligently. We do that today by increasing transparency so that applicants can make better purchasing decisions. We also take steps to encourage cost-effective purchasing through consortia and bulk buying. In addition, we cut and phase out support for outdated services like paging in order to refocus the program on broadband. But spending smart needs to go beyond these steps. We need to raise the E-rate cap. At a minimum, we need to own up to the fact that inflation has cut the purchasing power of this program. The E-rate program was sized at $2.25 billion in annual support 16 years ago. That was when less than 1% of Americans had access to broadband at home. That was when gas was $1 a gallon. It was a long time ago. All across the government, we index important programs to inflation, from Social Security to Medicare to veterans' educational assistance. There is nothing radical about this. We do it because it makes good sense to keep inflation from arbitrarily cutting the purchasing power of programs that matter. We should do it for E-rate too, because between when the cap was put in place and some adjustments were made in 2010, that is roughly $1 billion in missing support. I would have preferred to fix this gap here and now, instead of leaving it for a further notice of proposed rulemaking. So on this aspect of today's decision, I concur. I hope that going forward, we will have the courage to do this. I hope going forward, we will be bold, because this is not just a matter of getting schools and libraries connected. It's a matter of our global competitiveness. The world is flat. Knowledge, jobs, and capital will migrate to places where workers have digital age skills, especially those in STEM fields. We can't expect to compete if we educate the next generation with a support system frozen in the age of dial-up. The rest of the world recognizes this, and other nations are leading the way when it comes to bringing broadband to schools. In South Korea, 100% of schools are wired with high-speed broadband. In fact, with so much capacity, an effort is underway in South Korea to transition all students from traditional textbooks to digital readers by 2016, less than 2 years away. In Estonia, all schools are connected, and there is a nationwide effort to teach students as young as 7 years old how to write code. In Uruguay, nearly all primary and secondary schools have been connected, and every primary student has access to a free laptop. In Thailand, the government has established a one tablet per child policy in an effort to reduce the education gap between the nation's urban and rural children. By the end of next year, the government will have distributed devices to 13 million school children. Kazakhstan, too, is exploring how broadband can bring educational opportunities to its most rural villages. And meanwhile, the governments of China and India are exploring ways to bring one-to-one device learning to students through large-scale purchasing at low cost. The list goes on. Of course, we can suggest that these countries are different than the United States. They have different cultures. They have different education systems. But we can still take from these examples that improving broadband capacity must be a national priority. So we are at a crossroads. We can let other nations outspend us, outeducate us, and outachieve us. Or we can be courageous and do something about it. We can choose a future where all American students have the ability to gain the digital age skills they need to compete, no matter who they are, where they live, or where they go to school. As a policymaker and a parent, I believe that's a future worth fighting for. But back to today. We have taken a first step. We have done good things. Thank you to the work of so many in this building and so many in the education and library community for your commitment to E-rate and your contribution to this proceeding. Thank you also to the chairman for his laser-like focus on the power of Wi-Fi in our schools and libraries. We have more work ahead for E-rate 2.0, but this is a start. Thank you.
Commissioner Rosenworcel, it would be remiss if we did not comment, as Commissioner Clyburn has already, of your continuing leadership throughout this topic, the way in which you are the expert on this topic, the way in which you have been an undying advocate for it, and the way in which you have now taken all of that and turned it into a new challenge for us. We accept it. Thank you for everything you've done. Commissioner Pai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In America's northernmost library, up in Barrow, Alaska, I saw last summer how broadband can connect a community that no road reaches. In an 8th grade classroom in a predominantly Hispanic school in Los Angeles, I saw the promise of the interconnected classroom come to life. In a library in South Dakota, in schools in Kansas, I saw the potential of next-generation technologies to empower small communities and give rural Americans the opportunities found in our nation's largest cities. Students and teachers, parents and school boards, librarians and library patrons, they were promised E-rate modernization. They deserve a student-centered E-rate program. They need real reform. And what does the FCC give them today? The status quo. Whether you call it a Disconnect Ed initiative, E-rate 1.2, or just 158 pages endorsing more of the same, the FCC has forfeited this opportunity for real, bipartisan reform of the E-rate program. This is disappointing. Real reform would have meaningfully simplified the application process. It would have ended the unfair treatment of small, rural schools and libraries. It would have let local communities set their own education technology priorities. Instead of slapping a plan together the last minute after being called out by Republicans and Democrats alike for numbers that didn't come close to adding up, the Commission could have kept its promises rather than breaking them, as it does today. Let's start with one point of apparently universal agreement. The E-rate application process must be, as the order puts it, fast, simple, and efficient. But the rhetoric doesn't match the reality. Will schools and libraries generally still have to fill out a 17-page application to receive funding? Yes. Will they still have to follow specialized procurement rules in addition to state and local rules? Yes. Will they still have to sign a contract before knowing whether funding is even available? Yes. Will they still have to wait months after applying to receive any commitment of funding? Yes. And will schools still have to decide how to spend E-rate funds up to a year before the school year even begins? Yes. As Kevin Bacon put it in A Few Good Men, these are the facts, and they are not disputed. So, what does the order do to streamline the bureaucracy? Very little. To be sure, there's a token stab at trimming a few pages from the initial application for applicants with multi-year contracts, but only for 5-year contracts that give applicants no flexibility to adjust terms to changing needs. There is some scaling back of E-rate's procurement rules, but only for a subset of services that are subject to change every year or two. And there's the elimination of the technology planning requirement. But no one's had to comply with that requirement for the last 2 years anyway. In fact, the order adds to the paperwork. Applicants now will be required to keep records for 10 years. So, if the applicant cannot prove that its initial application passed the 28-day rule, the price is the primary factor rule, the 30% ineligibility rule, the brand new preferred contracts must be considered rule, the brand new within scope rule for multi-year contracts, or any one of the myriad other rules that have crept into E-rate's specialized procurement process, a school or library may be stuck with a multi-million-dollar bill from the government a decade after the fact. Now, all this assumes, of course, that a school or library gets funding in the first place. To apply, schools and libraries will be required to calculate up to 3 separate funding discounts and a 5-year internal connections budget. Now, these numbers, in turn, aren't based on a school's own conditions, but the aggregate statistics of its district and the percentage of the district's physical buildings that sit in rural areas. Consultants and surveyors are sure to delight in all this extra work. And what approach does the order take to reducing the backlog of E-rate appeals? Well, far from making the application process simpler, it layers onto our rules exceptions that have qualifications that themselves have exceptions, with everything to be ironed out at some indeterminate point in the future. Now, to be sure, the order will reduce the FCC's backlog by mandating that applicants go back to the Universal Service Administrative Company if they think that USAC has erred. But this is just window dressing. Stripping schools and libraries of their procedural rights doesn't do them any service, and adding yet another step to the process won't expedite action. By doubling down on complexity, the order's approach will also exacerbate the urban-rural E-rate gap. Small and rural schools and libraries cannot afford to hire the consultants that help large urban school districts and libraries navigate the E-rate process. And that's why so many rural schools and libraries simply don't participate in the E-rate program today. That is a real digital divide. And it's one that the order doesn't even try to address. But don't take my word for it. Just this week, Courtney Buffington, the executive director of the Kansas Research and Education Network, wrote me, "The fact of the matter is that the truly needy schools and libraries in our state suffer because of the complexity and cost associated with the E-rate program. Our members cannot afford for us to carry upwards of 2 to 3 years of accounts payable waiting for payments from the federal government. Nor can we afford to efficiently navigate the consortium application process without driving up costs or finding ways to game the system to make up for it." And moreover, the order keeps in place for Priority 1 services E-rate's inequitable funding approach that gives many large urban districts 90% discounts without any limit. The more you spend, the more you get. And so it's no wonder that, as the current program stands, a handful of urban schools walk away with the lion's share of funding, while students attending other schools that need funding are deprived year after year after year. Indeed, the District of Columbia, where we sit today, gets the second most E-rate funding per year on a per-student basis, about 3 times the national average, yet not one school or library in our nation's capital can credibly be called rural. Once again, those inside the Beltway win, while rural Americans are left behind. Now, the order's new budgets for internal connections only make it worse. The poorest rural and remote schools and libraries will have the same per-student budget as their urban brethren, even though their broadband prices are higher, their tax base is lower, qualified labor is harder for them to find, and competition is less prevalent in those areas. And anyone who's been to the Alaska bush can tell you that Wi-Fi routers don't cost the same everywhere in the country. When you have to take a plane to get to the closest Walmart, you get used to $10 a gallon milk. Now, the order also displays a curious disregard for the priorities of the local school boards, principals, teachers, parents, and librarians that E-rate supports with funding. Instead of letting local communities set their own priorities, the order reflects the Washington knows best mindset. It retains the priority system, with the FCC determining what gets funding each year or week, depending on the political winds. Just days ago, it looked like Wi-Fi was the priority, and funding for internet connectivity came in second. Today, internet connectivity nudges ahead into the lead. Last year, mobile data services were given priority. Now, no longer. Indeed, managed Wi-Fi will now be eligible for E-rate funding. But applicants better hope they qualify for funding in the first 2 years, because that eligibility has a built-in sunset. Look, here's the thing. The FCC has no business micromanaging the technology priorities of our local schools and libraries. We simply aren't equipped to tell every library in this country that it needs to buy these Ethernet wires or those Wi-Fi routers. We cannot assess the relative value of web hosting or caching services or a larger broadband pipe to a particular school's academic achievement. And because every school and every library has its own unique needs, its own budget constraints, its own infrastructure, with its own life cycle, we should have the humility to recognize that local schools and libraries might be in a better position than officials in Washington, D.C. to set their own priorities. Some have called this notion radical. I call it common sense. Now, speaking of priorities, one of the main objectives of the order was supposed to be closing the Wi-Fi gap. The order promised over $5 billion for Wi-Fi over the next 5 years, funding that would be predictable and consistent so that schools and libraries could plan for the future. But, as the commander of the USS Enterprise told Tom Cruise in Top Gun, son, your ego is writing checks that your body can't cash. As congressional leaders in the House and Senate recognized, and as many advocates here today have pointed out, the numbers for the Wi-Fi plan didn't add up and would have blown a $2.7 billion hole in E-rate's budget, slashing funds for internet connectivity. I thank Chairman Rockefeller, Chairman Upton, Chairman Walden, Senator Thune, and Senator Markey for their leadership on this issue. I also thank Commissioner Rosenworcel for her efforts. While we have good faith disagreement on some issues related to E-rate, we have a common understanding of arithmetic. And so, the Wi-Fi plan has been scaled back. The plan will last 2 years, not 5. It will end automatically instead of continuing in perpetuity. Priority 1 services will still have first priority, and Priority 2 services will still have second priority, although I concede the order's daring innovation of changing the nomenclature to Category 1 and Category 2. And the $1 billion per year funding target for Wi-Fi is nothing more than the traditional carry forward of unallocated E-rate funds from prior years, with somewhat better marketing. That's not real reform, and it leaves a trail of broken promises. The purported 75% bump in Wi-Fi funding for rural schools and libraries it's closer to 0%. The 60% increase for urban applicants, it's been slashed too. And because the order allows applicants to receive 5 years of funding, even now this is only a 2-year plan, curious decision to say the least, the same schools and libraries at the front of the line that have been getting internal connection funding over the last 5 years are likely to get the lion's share of the money. And so the number of students newly seeing the impact of Wi-Fi funding isn't the promised 43.6 million. I'll bet you it's closer to 0. That recent FCC chart showing state-by-state numbers of additional schools and libraries that are likely to get new Wi-Fi funding over the next 5 years as a result of the order, let's just say that it's no longer operative. Now, even these scraps depend on accounting gimmickry. Since February, there's been the repeated refrain that the FCC will invest an additional $2 billion over the next 2 years to support broadband networks. But the last public accounting of unused funds in the E-rate account said that only $600 million was available, with $200 million of that needed this year just to meet demand for Priority 1 services. And that leaves us $1.6 billion short. Where will that money come from? Well, the only place it can, the $4.7 billion in already committed funds sitting in the E-rate account. So schools and libraries, be prepared for more broken promises, because the FCC will have every reason to come after money that we've already committed to pay for promises the order is making today. So, what's next? Well, I doubt that the recent scramble to claim fiscal responsibility is anything more than a passing fad. After all, the order avoids the chief cause of waste in the current program, discount rates of up to 90% with no budgets for big spenders. It adopts connectivity targets that are based on speculation, not science. And it proposes to size future funding needs based on these goals, regardless of their impact, if any, on student achievement. And several outside parties have already told me that they've been promised a post-election increase in the E-rate budget. They even told me the specific month that it was coming, December. The story was remarkably consistent. So, mark my words, any talk of fiscal responsibility will be short-lived. In 5 months, maybe 6, we'll be back at this table discussing how much to increase Americans' phone bills. Universal service contribution rates have jumped 60% under this administration. What's a few billion dollars more? Now, 1 year ago, then Chairwoman Clyburn brought the Commission together to begin the process of reinvigorating, revitalizing, and revamping E-rate. I enthusiastically supported that notice of proposed rulemaking because it held out the promise of a better E-rate program, one centered on students and patrons instead of bureaucrats and accountants. And that document was backed by a bipartisan, unanimous vote. And I said back then, and I believe today, that when it comes to our children's education, we should not be afraid of the hard choices. We should not tinker around the edges. We should shoot for the moon, and we should aim to win. That's true today. We should have adopted a student-centered E-rate program, a one-page application, a funding commitment process that would last no more than a week, a 50% bump in funding for rural and remote schools instead of the 0 to 10% offered by the order, and end the outdated, complicated priority system, allowing local communities to make their own decisions, and an increase in funding by up to $1 billion each year for next-generation services, all accounted for and without raising fees a dime. And what disappoints me most is not that the chairman's office rejected my own long-standing proposal, nor that it rejected the compromises I offered working within the order's framework, nor that it rejected all of these belatedly. No, what disappoints me most is being told that further simplifying the application process and giving applicants additional flexibility were non-negotiable, that reducing incentives for waste and fraud was a red line that could not be crossed, that increasing the equity of the program for rural schools and libraries apparently violated a bedrock principle, and that having the money to meet our promises was too radical an idea, at least when proposed by a Republican. It is unfortunate that take it or leave it, party line votes have become the new normal for high-profile commission items. Making it worse, the final draft of this item was not provided to me until 10:13 a.m., 17 minutes before this meeting. And needless to say, I did not have a chance to carefully review the revised item upon which we are now voting. I was able to notice, however, that the pre-discount cost of the Wi-Fi plan has now increased by $300 million overnight. This is not good process. But more importantly, it is devastating substance for America's teachers, librarians, parents, students, and library patrons, many of whom I've met over the past several months, and all of whom agree with what I said almost 1 year ago to the day, that E-rate is a program worth fighting for. So after the band packs up and goes home, after the happy headlines fade, they are the ones who are going to have to wait years more for 21st century digital opportunities, for real E-rate reforms. For all of these reasons, I dissent.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope you all have a comfortable seat because I too have some views on this issue. This order represents a missed opportunity to comprehensively reform the E-rate program to ensure that it meets the needs of students and library patrons in the 21st century. The order spends a minimum of $2 billion on the policy du jour, closing the so-called Wi-Fi gap, while largely neglecting the rest of the program. It initiates this new spending spree without having first determined the long-term budget for the entire program. As a result, the short-sighted decisions today could lead to either a funding cliff for schools and libraries or higher phone bills for American ratepayers. Therefore, I must strenuously dissent for both process and policy reasons. In my short time at the Commission, I have not publicly criticized process issues. Instead, I prefer to focus on substantive concerns, if any, and address internal procedures behind the scenes. Unfortunately, the process used for this item was unacceptable. Let me explain my frustration and disappointment. Before this item was even circulated, I held 2 briefings with Commission staff to understand the direction it was going. In response, I submitted big picture edits that respected their direction. Again, this was before the item was circulated. I believe my proposed edits kept with my principles while still showing a great willingness to compromise. I then held 2 more meetings with Commission staff in which I explained my thoughts and concerns and sought their input on what was doable, all the while making clear that I wanted to get to yes. Weeks passed as I waited for a response. During that time, my staff and I were told to hold off suggesting any further edits until a new document can be circulated. That opportunity never came. Instead, late last night, I received a new document, only to learn there would be a straight no across the board for any of my edits and suggestions. A goose egg. No attempt was made to work out even the smallest of details. In the end, I never expected to get everything I proposed, but I don't believe it's appropriate to refuse to negotiate with me just because I'm a Republican appointee. To be clear, I support E-rate. It has been helpful in bringing telecommunications internet services to virtually all schools and libraries. That connectivity has expanded access to educational resources benefiting teachers and students, and it has enabled people that might not otherwise have internet access to use it at a library to obtain information, apply for jobs, and perhaps even file a complaint or comment with the FCC. Early on, I set my principles for E-rate reform out there. Reform the program on broadband by eliminating outdated services. Keep within an overall USF budget so reform doesn't come at the cost of consumers. Leverage existing investment rather than overbuilding. Increase matching requirements consistent with other programs. Don't oversupply. And overhaul program administration. Accomplishing reform within these broad guideposts should have been easily achievable. But today's order rejects modifications based on these principles, defers others, and takes questionable half measures on the rest. And it does so in a brazen, partisan fashion. Fundamentally, I'm concerned that this order shies away from comprehensive reform, even though the record is clear that such changes are long overdue. Promising to expand the scope now and reform the rest of the program later is a sleight of hand tactic that we see all too often in Washington, D.C. It is irresponsible. If we were serious about reforming the entire program, then why not put a serious proposal for the remaining reforms in the further notice rather than seek comment on an assortment of odds and ends and a budget increase? It is even more disturbing to hear informally that the justification for deferring the budget decision is to get the issue past the November elections. Obviously, the Commission is worried that Americans won't like the budgetary effects of the changes we are considering on their pocketbooks, and therefore we have to slide them in after the election when they can't do anything about it for a while. To me, this is a clear sign that we should reconsider the underlying decisions. Relatedly, I disagree with the order's single-minded focus on Wi-Fi. While some schools and libraries may benefit from improved Wi-Fi access within the building, others still need connectivity to the building. Connectivity is still a necessary prerequisite, and demand for bandwidth will only increase. Indeed, it could be intensified by making Wi-Fi more widely available. Yet we do not adequately address that here. I'm especially worried about initiating a new perceived Wi-Fi entitlement without having a long-term plan, much less a sustainable one, for the entire program and USF spending. After 2 years, it's not clear whether funding will continue to be available for Wi-Fi. That's hardly the predictability that schools and libraries need. Or perhaps by then, the majority of the Commission will have tried to ram through an increase in the E-rate budget. If a justification can be made to increase the E-rate budget, then it makes even more imperative that we establish an overall budget for USF, so that consumers that pay fees on their phone bills to support USF are not further burdened by the FCC. Instead, I'm very troubled that we'll be told to look the other way and just increase the contribution factor more. And if we consider it here, I fully expect that there will be calls to increase contributions for the other programs as well. I stand ready to be corrected on this point, but it always seems to be easier for some people to take more money from American people via taxes and fees rather than do the hard work. If more funding is justified for E-rate, let's dig in and find offsets, not stick it to hard-working poor and middle-class Americans. In terms of item specifics, let me touch on a few, although there are so many. First, I find that the assumption for tying E-rate support to libraries on a per-foot basis to be one of the silliest policies I've ever heard or seen. The size of a building is supposed to be the proxy measurement for how much subsidy a library should get? It makes as much sense as counting roofing tiles, toilets, or surrounding trees. I can't believe this is the best we can do. Second, I'm mystified by the decision to increase the matching requirements, but only for internal connections and only for the poorest schools. That is completely backward. More skin in the game through higher matching rates is important for all discount levels, so we can stretch E-rate dollars further and promote greater efficiencies. Since we seem to agree that it's a good policy, I don't understand why we can't apply it across the board. Third, I do not see where lowest corresponding price is reflected in the underlying statutory authority. The statute calls for a discount. Congress is completely aware of how to establish a requirement to offer the lowest price, if it chooses to do so, as it did many years ago with the lowest unit rate for political advertising. It did not do so in this instance, and therefore I'm not in agreement with our current rules to suggest otherwise. While our interpretations may have been upheld, it's never too late to follow the statute. Moreover, this misguided policy has spawned unnecessary confusion, tying up funding while the Commission and USAC try to sort out how to apply it in practice. And now we're upping the ante with more enforcement. Fourth is the assault on the Commission's highly successful competitive bidding process. The record made clear that competition in the program can dramatically reduce costs, allowing schools and libraries to make the most of their E-rate funds. While it may be true that avoiding competitive bidding could speed up timing, exempting services from these important requirements is also a way to install graft, fraud, waste, abuse, and criminal behavior. For a commission that's supposedly focused on competition, this is a puzzling step backwards. Last and most infuriating, the item delegates so much authority to the Bureau and USAC to do almost whatever they would like to do whenever. This is not a criticism of our professional staff, who are dedicated and hardworking, but rather I worry that this mechanism is a way to remove accountability and bury decisions that should be made more public. I thank the staff for the many briefings and only wish you were authorized to actually consider a balanced plan that we all could support. Perhaps next time we'll have the opportunity to roll up our sleeves and work together in a bipartisan manner to complete necessary reforms. The chairman made an interesting point early on when he said you need to read the handwriting on the wall, and I guess that's exactly what happened in this instance. Thank you so much.
I'm going to pick up on something established by Commissioner O'Reilly in previous meetings when he's asked the staff for specific input, and asked John Wilkins specifically. There have been a couple of allegations that I think could be disturbing for schools and libraries and those who are considering what's happening here about poor arithmetic and about Wi-Fi going away in 2 years. Could you address that specifically with some numbers and perhaps even some citations to the order, please?
Mr. Chairman. I think as a clarification, what this order says is after 2 years, the use of per pupil or per square foot as the basis of budgeting funds ends. But the order does establish a $1 billion target for Wi-Fi that goes beyond 2 years.
So Wi-Fi is permanent. It doesn't disappear in. There's no 2
year limit on the Wi-Fi.
Okay, thank you.
Now that does raise the question: is there sufficient funds to do it? Let me just walk through the projections the staff has done this way. So today, about half of priority 1 is non-broadband. So that's $1 billion. This order sets in motion for some of those services, just a zeroing out, and others a transition that brings those non-broadband services out of the program. So at its simplest level, what the order actually does over 5 years is it shifts that $1 billion of non-broadband services to the $1 billion for Wi-Fi. Now, timing is quite important because it's a phase-out. I've got the projections for the next 5 years. Next year, that phase-out will save $350 million. I'm going to round off to the nearest 50 million just to make it easy. In the second year, it is $600 million. Third year, $800. The fourth year, $900. The fifth year, $950. Now, of course, those first 2 years, we have $1 billion of reserves set aside for each of those 2 years, and I think that's one of the things in the whole stakeholder engagement. Everyone's agreed on that. Now, that gets to the question of years 3, 4, and 5. As Commissioner Rosenworcel said, the spending smart, the transparency reforms, staff projections clearly show that we can expect some spending efficiency in the broadband services. 10 to 20% is some of the projections we've done. That would pay for the $1 billion for those out 3 years. Now, of course, the big question is what is the growth going to be in broadband services? I think a tremendous comment on that. And out of an abundance of caution, I think what the order does is it first puts the escape valve in that Commissioner Rosenworcel mentioned that says if there's ever a shortfall, of course, we'll make sure that the outside connections are funded first. And then the FNPRM just calls the question of will that growth outstrip the efficiencies? But that's the math.
Great. Thank you very much. You'd hate to be discussing an educational issue and be accused of poor math. We're at a watershed moment, as I think everybody has identified. Senator Rockefeller, Markey, and Snow gave the nation E-rate in 1996, and since then it has done wonderful and amazing things for American schools and communities that all of us sitting here in the dais have seen. But that was 18 years ago when the internet was something that was screeching over a modem attached to a dial-up telephone line. no responsible business would stick with an IT plan developed in 1998. We owe the same rigorous self-examination to our schools and libraries. So let's parse out what we've done in this modernization effort. We are targeting already available funds to meet the greatest current need. Now, when we say already available funds, let's just make sure. Money that is not spent does not exist in the world in which we live. And so the fact that it may have been sitting out there on the books but not being used means it's not being used. And so we are going to use it. We are wringing as much as possible out of each E-rate dollar. We owe that to the American ratepayer. And we are formally and expeditiously investigating the appropriate funding level for the program based on the steps we are now taking. The effort begins with closing the Wi-Fi gap. Digital teaching strategies require connectivity to the student's desk. From Virginia to California, I've seen how such connectivity changes the learning experience. And it makes libraries into community information hubs. But unfortunately, in recent years, E-rate supported requests for Wi-Fi have been honored in less than 5% of the schools and 1% of the libraries. And last year, there was zip, nada, nothing in terms of E-rate support for getting connectivity to the student rather than the inanimate object sitting in the corner. So the first step is to target $1 billion of annual funding to connect to real people, the students and library patrons. And importantly, doing so consistent with the bedrock principle of prioritizing funding for those who need it most, poor and rural schools and libraries. The order also begins a multi-year transition away from 20th century technology to 21st century technology. Currently, half of the E-rate spending, as you just heard a moment ago, is for non-broadband activities. We're reprioritizing for broadband. The order also takes a series of steps to maximize the cost effectiveness of E-rate spending. As I said, we owe this to the American ratepayer who supports the program. We also owe this to program participants, since every dollar saved is a dollar that's available to another school or library. And finally, the order streamlines the program for schools and libraries, making it faster, simpler, more efficient. So let's pause here for a moment to take stock. Because of what we do today, 10 million kids will be connected next year who otherwise wouldn't. That's a good day's work. That's something to be proud of. That's something that all of you sitting here who have worked so hard on this can go home tonight and say to your family, your friends, I made a difference today in the lives of 10 million people, 10 million school kids. Yet this isn't the end of the road. We act to close the Wi-Fi gap now because of the fact that if we didn't, it couldn't have an impact in 2015. We also act now to put in place a new set of spending realities. We now need to assess how these acts will affect the ongoing needs of the program. And to help in that effort, we've initiated a further notice on the appropriate funding levels. Rather than hypothesize, we can now study the impact of our improved cost effectiveness, of our reallocation from narrowband services to broadband services. And we need to do this at the speed of business. We've closed the Wi-Fi gap, and we're going to rapidly assess the question of funding. But let me be clear. It would be a mistake to simply add money to a program that was set in the 20th century. Today we start a stepwise, logical, business-like decision-making process that will lead us to a logical, fact-based conclusion. Technology has changed. The needs of students and library users have changed. And now, E-rate has changed. Thank you so much to those of you sitting here and all who you represent for your incredible efforts, for the fact that you made us keep the air conditioning in the entire building on for the last couple of nights because you've been here working so late. Thank you, Trent, for what you've done in constantly pushing this forward. Thank you, Lisa, for being someone who was an advocate of the first order to make sure that this gets done right. Thank you, Michael Steffens. Special shout out to Michael. For the terms of 3 chairmen of this commission, you've been the intellectual spark. You've been the person who keeps us focused on it. You've been the person who is driving it. You've been the person who's been building bridges. And we're grateful to you for that incredible contribution that you've made. And a special shout out to John Wilkins, our managing director, who brought his McKinsey partner skills and creative thinking to a very tough challenge and moves us ahead significantly today. So with that, I will call for the vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
The ayes have it. The item is carried. The request for editorial privileges is granted. Let me ask a question as to whether any of the commissioners have any announcements that they want to make. Commissioner Pye.
I'd just like to take a minute to introduce our office's new summer law clerk, Emily Fitzgerald. Cleveland is lucky to have LeBron back, but we are even luckier to have Emily. Now, Emily actually joined.
Oh, he went back?
He's going back home.
Yeah.
LeBron, he's going back home.
Wow, I actually broke news here. This is great. How about that?
Oh, wait a minute, you broke news.
Well, I'm going to take credit for it.
You finish your introduction, and then I'll just...
Okay, Commissioner Clyburn told me. So, yes.
Okay.
The two of us and LeBron, like that. Anyway, Emily actually joined us a little over a month and a half ago, but she was not at the June meeting. And why, you might ask? And the answer is she has very misplaced priorities. Instead of sitting here and listening to presentations about the IP transition trials and low-power FM, she was participating in a friend's wedding. So, what can you do? It's been a long climb back up into our good graces, but it's been aided by the very tasty stuffed peppers that she's brought into our office. Now, this fall, Emily is going to be entering her 3rd year of law school at the University of Texas, where she is the editor-in-chief of the Review of Litigation. While in Austin, she has worked for Texas Supreme Court Justice Jeffrey Boyd. Emily spent her undergraduate years at the University of Arkansas, not Kansas, but close enough. And in addition to learning how to call those hogs, she made time to earn bachelor's degrees in both journalism and biological anthropology. That's pretty cool. Emily is originally from Colleyville, Texas, and as all of the people from the Lone Star State probably do, I'm sure she thinks that Texas is the greatest state in the Union. She's never been to Parsons, Kansas, however. So, notwithstanding that omission, we are really glad to have Emily on board. She's done fantastic work thus far, and we can't wait to take advantage of her expertise over the next several months. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You know, all this stuff about calling hogs, Texas, greatest state, you have conveniently just kind of slid past real fast the fact that her roots, she's a Buckeye. Okay?
That's right.
In all this LeBron discussion, one of the reasons he's back in Cleveland is that he has a locker at The Ohio State University in the basketball facility. Truly.
Really?
LeBron James has his own locker there so that he can come and practice with the Ohio State basketball team and help them once again get into the Final Four.
Very impressive.
That's why he went back.
He wanted to be close to his locker. It had nothing to do with any other terms. He just wanted to be close to his locker. I'm looking at Commissioner O'Reilly sitting down there with his hands quietly folded. If there is nothing else, either legitimate or outrageous, that ought to come before this body at this point in time, Madam Secretary, would you please set the next agenda meeting?
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Friday, August 8th, 2014.
Thank you very much. Until then, we stand adjourned. Whoa, look at this. Brooks dashing across the front.
No, you weren't here last time? Oh, Brooks.
Oh, that was a nice gesture, though.
Thank
Brooks.
you.
She used to be my boss. Kim used to be my boss.
Well, come here with me. I know what it's like to work for her.
All right, everyone. Thanks for sticking around. Chairman has a few words to get us started, and then we'll open up to your questions.
Thanks, Kim. I want to hear about Brooks. I want to hear those stories. A couple of thoughts to begin with. Today, the Commission approved 3 important items that are united by one theme: access to the unserved. One of the primary vehicles the Commission has had over the years for ensuring that all systems can get online is our E-rate program. As you heard us talk repeatedly, for the past 18 years, the E-rate program has played an essential part in making sure that our schools and libraries were able to take part in this incredible revolution that was going on. But as I said in my statement, the realities of connectivity 18 years ago with a screeching modem are quite different today than they were way back then. And so what we did today was update the program to provide Wi-Fi to schools and libraries, and to take significant actions to make sure that we're meeting the needs of schools and libraries, and that we're meeting that need with efficiency, both for how the schools and libraries do it themselves, as well as what we can do to help them get the best kind of prices, such as what John Wilkins announced about how you'll be able to buy Wi-Fi. Schools and libraries will be able to buy Wi-Fi through the GSA, world's largest procurer of such things. The new rule will change the program now to target $1 billion every year to expand Wi-Fi networks in schools and libraries nationwide. Let me go back and let me repeat that. It will target $1 billion every year after year after year after year for Wi-Fi in schools and libraries. And that means that immediately in year 2015, 10 million students are going to experience new and better opportunities. And it'll put us on the path to meet the President's goal of connecting 99% of American students to true high-speed broadband within 5 years. It is an essential part of our long-term mission to lay the groundwork for an all-broadband future for all of America. And in that regard, to improve access to the underserved, we also acted today to expand access to rural America, where roughly 15 million Americans couldn't get broadband access if they wanted it. By establishing a budget for a series of rural broadband experiments that the idea of which we had adopted in the January Tech Transitions Order, and to create an objective, clear-cut methodology for selecting winning applications to serve those high-cost areas, and to do it through this tool of auctions. And finally, we took an important step to improve access to online information for Americans living with disabilities, building on our previous actions to enhance quality standards for closed captioning on television and closed captioning requirements for full-length video programming online. We will now require captioning of video clips that end up on the internet. We talk a lot about those who hear with their eyes. And we have taken another step today to see that those who hear with their eyes are not disadvantaged from participating in the revolution that all of us are a part of. So, be happy to take any questions you might have. Should we throw him a curve and start at the opposite end of the table?
Brooks.
You're just sucking up to Brooks because he used to work for you. See, look at this. He's he thought he could get himself
I was going to ask a question, and I might actually have to. I'm going to have to think on the fly here, which I never do very well. Brooks Bolick, Politico. Are you disappointed that the 5 years wasn't included in that you had to roll back some of your more ambitious items in the new rules?
I think we accomplished our goals. The Wi-Fi gap has been closed. 10 million kids are going to get served next year. The E-rate program, which for almost 2 decades has not had a review and an updating, has been updated. I think we accomplished our goals. Brendan.
Hi, Chairman. Brendan Sasso with National Journal. A lot of a couple carriers now are starting to experiment with these sponsored data plans. I know that the old net neutrality rules didn't include wireless.
Right.
Do you think that's something that should get a serious look at expanding the rules?
Brooks, Brooks, let's see, you're Brooks, you're Brendan. I'll get this right. I go back to first principles. I have stood at this podium multiple times. I'm sure I will multiple other times. And I have said, look, the question of establishing prioritization, if it hurts competition, if it hurts consumers, if it hurts innovation, I'm against it and we're not going to tolerate it. That's the key. I'm not going to sit here and hip shoot some kind of a judgment. But that's the important thing about what's going on in the Open Internet Order. Because today, there is nothing to measure against. But prioritization that hurts consumers, hurts competition, and hurts innovation won't be allowed.
And those principles apply on wireless, you think?
Those principles apply in the last order to wired. And one of the questions we're asking in this order is whether they apply to wireless. But it's a question being asked. Hi, Lynn.
Do you have any plans to change your process for negotiating and drafting orders in light of the heavy criticism you took from your Republican colleagues today?
Oh, I think what's important about that, Lynn, is what happens insofar as negotiations is a back and forth. Commissioner O'Reilly talked about how he had multiple briefings even before the item came out. We made a point of making sure that everybody on the floor fully understood the goals and had a full opportunity to engage. There's a difference between negotiating and changing principles, however. And we stuck with our principles. And the result is that 10 million kids are going to get Wi-Fi next year.
Thank you.
Howard Beskirk with Communications
Howard.
Daily. I guess I wanted to follow up on Lynn's question. There have been a lot of 3-2 votes under your chairmanship, a lot more than under the chairmanship of your predecessor. And O'Reilly basically said today that he feels like his edits were being ignored and that he was getting nothing back when he suggested edits. And I just wanted to ask, do you think that there's a problem that's developing? I mean, is there something that could be working better in this process?
Howard, I read in a publication of great repute yesterday that of the 16 agenda item votes that we've taken since I became chairman, 10 of them had been 5-0. Today we added 2 more, so out of the 19 votes that we have taken, a dozen have been 5-0, unanimous. We are a commission of strong individuals with firmly held beliefs working for a common purpose that is not affected by whether we always agree or not. But I think the statistics speak for themselves. 90% of our actions are unanimous. And of the big actions that we take here, the vast majority have been 5-0.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. David Hatch, Policy and Regulatory Report.
Hi, David.
Some prominent Democrats are urging you to drop paid prioritization from your net neutrality proposal. Will you heed their request?
I have been real clear, as I mentioned to Brendan, on where I am on prioritization. If prioritization hurts consumers, hurts competition, hurts innovation, then we're against it, period. We've got an ongoing proceeding to figure out specifically how that gets implemented. But if it hurts consumers, hurts innovation, hurts competition, nix. Gotham.
Hi, Gautam Nagesh, Wall Street Journal. Chairman, next week is the end of the comment period. By some counts, there have been over 600,000 comments.
647,000, I was told this morning.
Thank you. Exactly. So, first of all...
It's kind of like LeBron, late breaking news,
So how do you process that amount of information, and have any of the comments or in aggregate affected your thinking about any issues in particular?
Yeah, there's a lot of late night oil is the answer to the first question, and we're looking for creative, approaches to solving common problems. And we're mining through it, looking for that. That's what will influence us. Sir. Yes, Brian.
Brian Fung from the Washington Post. Aereo is saying that it's a cable company for the purposes of copyright law, but it seems like it's trying to raises a question as to whether Aereo should be considered a cable company or an MVPD by the FCC. What's your take on that?
Nobody's asked us to opine on that, and it's probably, again, not a wise decision for me to hip shoot on that. Brian?
It's Monty Taylor,
Yes.
Communications Daily.
Monty.
You mentioned that you saw Commissioner Clyburn's comments on the IP captioning item as spurring moving further down the line on the CVAA and on captioning. What exactly would that be? What's the next move for all that stuff?
Well, we asked a bunch of questions in this item, and we want to see what the answers are on that. I mean, I meant what I said about the fact that that individuals with special needs have always had to kind of wait until technology came along that addressed them. And I think that we have an opportunity here to say, let's put this up front. Waiting isn't good enough. We need to be saying at the outset, this needs to be something that is considered up front, not is addressed later on. And
Would you want all video on the internet to be closed caption?
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
I'm specifically not saying that.
Understood.
And if you read the item, it specifically says that. But what I'm saying is that we want to make sure that those who hear with their eyes and who read with their ears are participating in the revolution that's happening, and to the best of our authority.
Hi, Chairman. Kate Tamarella with The Hill. To follow up on the closed captioning question, what's your response to the concerns from broadcasters and other video distributors that new requirements on video clips could keep companies from uploading videos at all? Are you concerned that would further disadvantage the hearing impaired community?
I've been heartened by how the broadcasters and content creators have been working with this. I mean, so for instance, we have a 12-hour rule right now. There was one major brand name broadcaster who came in and said, we can do it in 3. I believe in their good faith. I believe in technology, and I believe that our job is to establish the challenge for that good faith and for that technology.
Bryce Bashik with Bloomberg BNA. How are you, Mr. Chairman? Publicly, you've said that Title II reclassification is on the table. Yet in private meetings, there are reports that you believe it's too politically difficult. What do you really think about Title II reclassification?
So, first of all, the report that I've seen on that, at least, was at a terrific meeting that I had with some Silicon Valley early stage companies where we were talking about the whole concept of the open internet. And what I was saying there was what I had said here previously. And that is that I'm against prioritization if it harms consumers, harms competition, or harms innovation. And that I wanted to focus on the policy issues. If somebody walked away from there and drew political conclusions or thought they were hearing political conclusions, what I want to focus on is the policy. And Title II is on the table. I went to the cable convention and I said to them, and Title II is something we will not be afraid to use. I believe that we need to take care of prioritization if it harms consumers, harms competition, harms innovation.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Jeff Bliss from MLEX. I wanted to ask you, in light of your recusal from the AT&T trial review, I'm wondering if Earthlink weighs in on either of the mergers that you guys are looking at, AT&T DirecTV as well as Comcast Time Warner Cable. Would you feel an obligation to recuse yourself from those procedures?
Well, the first thing on that is that it's a hypothetical, and the second is that if the hypothetical should happen, I'd be guided by my general counsel.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Sean Cavanaugh with Education Week.
Sean, good to see you again, sir.
Thank you. A question about one of the concerns that emerged during this whole E-rate proposal, which was from some school officials that as Wi-Fi funding increased, somehow the focus on basic broadband to the school, basic connectivity, would erode. So in this order, what changes did you make to try to address that concern, if any? Can you talk about the specifics there?
Sure. There's a escape valve, a safety net, whatever descriptive term you want to use on it, that says that here we have this target for $1 billion a year forever, just to be clear, okay, for Wi-Fi. And it doesn't make much sense if you've got the Wi-Fi here and there's no gazintas, there's nothing connecting with it. If that gets in the way of this, then a reprioritization can take place. But this goal continues to exist.
Just to be clear, do you mean a reprioritization set by the FCC overall for all schools, or
no? So that Wi-Fi funding could be used for Category 1. Category 2 funding could be used for Category 1 if you get into that kind of a situation. As you heard John Wilkins say, and he'll be up here in a minute, and you can go through the arithmetic till the decimals won't carry anymore. That we believe that's not going to be necessary, but if it is, the safety net's there. Yes, sir.
Chris with Bloomberg News. I'm just filling in for Todd Shields. He's on vacation. So.
You know, Chris, that's a heavy assignment you got there.
Yeah, Commissioner Riley said sometimes it's like filling clown shoes. So. I'll be sure to mention that to Todd. So I just wanted to ask you about this week. Dish weighed in on the Time Warner Comcast merger, and also AT&T and DirecTV, and said that there's nothing that could be done that would remedy the competitive harm that this would cause. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, given that you have these two major mergers pending. When you kind of look at the landscape right now, what are your do you have concerns about the competitive environment with these major mergers on the horizon?
That's why we have these proceedings. I'm not going to sit here and speculate. We're in the process of collecting information, and based on that information, we will make a decision. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kim.
John Wilkins will be up here if anyone has further E-rate questions. Yes. Yes.
I think we'll just take them in order, so let's do the captioning item first with the Media Bureau. If there are questions for that. Okay.
Questions on captioning?
Daly. There was some discussion among the commissioners about a waiver process for small broadcasters. Is that formalized in the rule, or is that just the normal waiver process?
Okay. The statute provides that parties can file requests for exemption due to economic burden.
And that's in the rule?
It is. It's in the statute and it's in
Okay.
the rule as well.
Okay. Anybody else?
Lynn?
Okay, sorry.
No, I got a couple more.
Can you define what near live clips are? Is that a dodgy one?
Near live clips are defined in the existing IP closed captioning rules, and they're clips that are produced and recorded within 24 hours of being shown on television.
Within 24 hours.
I'm sorry?
The clips are recorded, so it's not
The video programming. It is the video programming. Near live programming is already defined in the existing closed captioning rules, and it's programming that's, I believe, produced or recorded within 24 hours of being shown on television with captions.
Okay, and this is actually going to be my question, so I'm going to jump on you right here.
Go
and then
for
you
it.
can go back. So the definition of both live and near live relates to the timing of the posting in relationship to the airing, not...
No, it relates to the timing of the programming being shown on television.
Okay, so it's the being coincident with the actual happening of it. And it's not the posting in relationship to that. And
That's correct.
This is to encourage posting coincident with the broadcasting. Is that am I understanding that correct? So that it could be posted before you, because the captioning for the programming on television, it's not required to be captioned, right? If it's a live.
It is required to be captioned on television.
I got one more. If Lynn doesn't.
I'm just trying to understand it still. So people would clip this immediately as a live program, whether it's news or sports, is being posted. They clip it immediately and they put it on, but they don't have to carry over the
They would have
captioning
a grace period for video clips of live programming, a grace period of 12 hours, and for near live, a grace period of 8 hours. And by the conclusion of that grace period, they would need to have provided captions on the file of the clip online.
I guess my confusion is more a technical one than a regulatory one then. Is there some difference in how you carry over captioning when it's live captioning compared to how you carry over captioning when it was not live? I don't really...
So when you... Oh, sorry. When you have pre-recorded programming, let's think about it in reverse. You have the luxury of time in generating those captions, and the captions accompany the programming prior to air. So to the extent that you would be clipping from it, you have those captions ahead of time. With live and near live programming, you see a preponderance of live captioning. The captions are generated as here on the fly, and the extra technical challenges that accompany those processes, right? When you're trying to grab the captions that have been attached at the last moment before air, means that we're giving folks an extra bit of time, so they can still grab those clips and put those online. If you think of, say, a sporting event, they can grab those clips, put those online using their existing process, and then bring the captions along.
Okay.
So
it's kind of a two-step process to get the captions. I mean, captions and the non-captioned portion. Is that?
It is today. We're optimistic that technology will catch up to make that all automated.
I'm sorry, I'm done now, Monty. I'm sorry.
I only got two more. There was some discussion during the proceeding about whether companies would have to, once they captioned clips that were part of the grace period, go track down their old uncaptioned one and get rid of it. How did that end up coming out in the order? What do you mean by get rid of it? They had to replace it. Whether they had to replace their old clips. Like they put up a clip that's uncaptioned. 12 hours later, they put up a clip that's captioned. I saw some NAB filings where they were saying we shouldn't have to go find the uncaptioned one and get rid of it.
We call those advanced clips, and that's teed up in the further notice.
Okay, and then my final question, is there anything in there about enforcement, about what will happen to companies that don't follow these rules?
What the item says is that we recognize that there are going to be some technological challenges with posting some of these clips, and that we will take those challenges into account when we receive complaints.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Any more on captioning? Okay, are there any for the rural, I'm sorry?
What you just said about the advanced was not what I understood. On the press release, it refers to advanced clips as those that are shown on air, that are distributed to the online before they're shown on air with captions.
That's what I had understood the question to be, but maybe I misunderstood the question.
What you just said, and maybe I misunderstood, but I thought you were talking about, or that he was talking about, the near live and live that are posted without captions. Even though they were captioned when they were on television, they're posted during this grace period without.
For live and near live, they do have to make sure that the clips that they put up during that grace period are then replaced by ones that have captions.
Thank you. Good tag
Okay,
team.
all right, any for the rural broadband item? Howard, okay, I guess Carol Maddie is here, and John Chambers, okay.
Yeah, I just had a couple of follow-up questions. One was, it seemed like there was some discussion about how the whole idea here is to take a lot of discretion out of the process, so that funds would be awarded in a way where there didn't have to be a lot of decision making. Is that based? Did I understand that correctly? That it's more just go ahead.
Sure. Actually, our objective is to emulate as closely as possible the competitive bidding process that we expect to be conducting for Phase 2. So we've already, the Commission already has done a reverse auction for Mobility Fund Phase 1 and Tribal Mobility Fund Phase 1, and, we need to adopt the rules for the reverse auction for Phase 2, and so we want to use this experiment to basically test out some of the key concepts that we hope to apply in the Phase 2 competitive auction.
I guess the reason I was asking about that is because with the BTOP program a couple years ago, there were a lot of concerns about the government sort of picking winners and losers. But I mean, with a mechanism like this, does the government do you still effectively have to make decisions among the different applicants?
No, it would be done numerically based on the cost,
okay.
The cost of the cost per location.
And then also. Forgive me for not understanding the mechanism for these other auctions, but is this done by the auctions division, or who runs the auctions in this case?
Well, John and I are the ones that are running it, and we're working to adapt, the auction software that has previously been used.
Okay, and then one final question. I was just hoping you could. There's some text here about bidding credits and states providing some. Do we know how much at this point? How much of this is going to be money that where you'll be seeking matching funds from the states or not?
That's a further notice. So the Commission is seeking further comment on the idea of potentially having bidding credits for the Phase 2 competitive bidding process that will happen after the offer of model-based support, and it could be more than just matching funds from a state. It could also be from a regional authority or other non-federal governmental agency. There's some states that have regional bond authorities for infrastructure development. Or state universal service fund, a variety of different sources of state funding.
Thank you.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand the three different categories: the $75 million, the $15 million, and the $10 million. Should I read anything into the differing language in the press release between the $75 million being used to test construction and the $15 million being used to test interest, or is that just somebody?
No significance to the different words.
Language
Trying not to be repetitive in language.
And then to distinguish between the $15 million and the $10 million, which are both the same speed levels.
There, the difference is between high-cost areas and extremely high-cost areas. So the Bureau already has adopted the cost model that will be used for the offer of support in price cap areas, and the cutoff between high-cost and extremely high-cost is $207.81 per location. So if it's a place where it's more expensive than 207, then it would be extremely high-cost.
And is the 207 per connection the same price as for that's the cutoff for the $75 million for that cap?
No, there's it's the same. So the $75 million is focused on geographic areas that are eligible for phase 2 funding up to the 207, although, as the order will explain, there's some opportunities to pull in additional locations.
There'll be a simpler way to suss through those numbers. The Bureau will shortly be publishing both a map and files that will show for every census block how much annual support would be made available. So we're not going to require any applicant to figure out the model and figure out how much would be available in the model. We will publish those numbers. Those are going to be the amounts of federal support that are available in every census block in the country, and that's the basis upon which anyone would be able to apply.
And up to 207. I'm sorry. Up to 207?
Don't worry too much about the numbers. The simple answer is very soon we will publish files that will list the available funding for available areas for the experiments.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say thank you for that line about don't worry about the numbers, because I think that's my new lead. So.
The numbers are all based on the model, so if you want to get into the
I could go into a long discourse about that. I was trying to simplify things.
We're happy to go into model assumptions, we'd be happy to go into the numbers. Our point is the amounts of support are going to be made available without an applicant having to determine whether something is high cost, extremely high cost. We'll just make the amount of support available.
Yeah. We already published, actually, maybe a way to think about it is on June 30th, we published the phase 2 map for purposes of the challenge process. If you go online and look at it, it's color-coded, and that will be the same map that we will be enhancing with additional information. So
I can get you the link to that later.
But without the map and the specific numbers, when you talk about the same or lower amounts, this is for the $75 million, the same or lower amounts of support offered for phase 2 carriers, that is the same number, whatever the number is, as the $15 million for the high cost areas. That's the cutoff number for high cost, and so the extremely high cost is something above.
The reference to the same or lower is the cost model calculates an amount of support for every census block, which varies from census block to census block. So basically, folks that are bidding to get the support for the experiments would be bidding at an amount equal to or less than. So
for the $75 million at the 25 megabit speeds, if someone wanted to go into an extremely high cost area and offer that, and they could do it at whatever the model is showing as support for that census block, that would come under the $75 million?
That's not the thrust of where the $75 million is targeted. The $75 million is targeted at the areas that are high cost, not extremely high cost.
But what's in the order, does it explicitly say to potential applicants, don't bother coming to us with an application for a 25 megabit thing if you're going into an extremely high cost area, or is that?
No, it's more so. If you were planning a network deployment, you'd be able to look at the files. Let's say you had 4 census blocks in your network deployment, 3 of which were in high-cost areas and money was made available. 1 was an extremely high-cost area. You'd have to determine whether, based on the information we're providing, whether you can build a network and maintain it for that amount of support. You can build into the extremely high-cost area. It would be reflected in your bid that you covered that extremely high cost area.
The cost efficiency level to be one of presumably, you probably wouldn't be able to do
You would be
that.
seen as being more cost effective because you would be including an area that's extremely high cost area, perhaps, but it'll depend on the bids.
So how is this cost efficiency going to be determined then? It's not, well, I was assuming it was just going to be, I'm serving X connections for X amount of dollars. It's not just a per connection cost number?
Lynn, the item actually will come out today.
All right.
And perhaps we can get into that level of detail with the item. Okay.
The short answer is...
That was going to be my last question, is when was the item coming out? So today.
The short answer is it's cost effectiveness as compared to the model-based support. So it's not, X dollars for number of locations. It's X dollars for number of locations as compared to the model-based support.
Gotcha.
All right, thanks. Okay, E-rate. John's all alone.
There's reinforcements back there if we need it.
On the, I'm going to go ahead, okay?
Go ahead.
On the further notice, do you guys look at expanding the base? That's been an issue in the past on USF.
No, it's focused on the E-rate program requirements.
So it just looks at whether or not you should raise. I'm assuming it's to increase the amount of funds that go into the E-rate program. Correct?
Right. It actually is pretty specific at each part of the network that schools need to achieve the goals. So that's the key thing, is the order adopts goals, and the further notice says, in light of those goals, each part of the network that a school needs to reach those goals, are current funds that are in the program enough? If not, why and how much?
So the question, I guess the thing that I don't understand is, I know this is down the road, but if you raise the amount of money that goes to E-rate, don't you have to raise the amount of money that customers pay into USF?
Right. If the only thing that happened was you said more money goes against E-rate, then that would affect the contribution factor for universal service. But of course, the overall universal service contribution factor is the sum total of everything
All
that
the
changes.
programs,
right. But yes, if the only thing that changed was just increased E-rate cap, then yes, that's the one thing that would change.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Can you explain this whole thing about the test? And is it a 2-year test or a 5-year test?
Sure. No. Yep. So the chairman's core Wi-Fi proposal has 2 parts to it. Specify a target of $1 billion a year for Wi-Fi internal connections, and the second part was allocate that based on this new approach, which would be a budget based on per pupil or per square foot for a library. Okay. The first part is not time limited. This order says there is a target of $1 billion for Wi-Fi internal connections as part of the program, period. So that's what the chairman was saying in the main press conference. The one limitation on that is the safety net, right? So as we get to later years, and in my remarks to the main commission meeting, I walk through the way that we've analyzed the budget, and we actually think that no safety net will be needed. But that said, there is uncertainty around growth in the need. So if there was ever a need, there is a safety net that says if there was not enough money to meet the priority 1 needs, it would come against that target. But it's a permanent target that is in the program. So it is not even a 5-year plan. It is a new part of E-rate is there is a $1 billion target for Wi-Fi every year. And that's a big change, right? I mean, up to this point, the amount of money that would be available in a year really was an unknown number until well after applications had been made, and it was much more of just an unknown question. Now, the second part, how will that $1 billion target actually be allocated against applications? For the next 2 years, it will use a per pupil, per square foot approach. Essentially, schools are going to have a choice. Schools and libraries have a choice. For the next 2 years, they can opt in to that approach. I think as there was a lot of the discussion leading up to the item, the staff view, and I think the view of the adopting commissioner certainly would be that could work quite well. I mean, we got tons of comment that said the budgets being adopted actually are very reasonable budgets.
And that's a big change in E-rate to say that we'll use this sort of a method for allocating those funds. And so because it's a big change, that's going to continue to be reviewed throughout. And essentially after 2 years, the commission would have to act again to say, we'll keep that methodology versus maybe some other methodology, but the $1 billion a year is still what's going to be the target. That make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
So
Sure.
what, I feel like I've asked this question of like 4 different people, 10 different ways. What happens after 2 years? What would have to happen to invoke that safety net? Would that be a new NPRM? Would that be, I mean, could that happen? Yeah,
So-
I'm just trying to figure out how automatic the switch from $1 billion a year for Wi-Fi only to less than $1 billion a year would be.
Yeah. So the question of, is it ever less than $1 billion? So at any given year in the future, if it ever was the case that there was not enough funds to cover priority one first, the safety net would kick in. It could be year 3, it could be year 15, unless the commission did a whole other change. But there's no required revisiting of that. That is just now the new approach. There's a target every year. If there's ever not enough funds, the safety net would be invoked. Right? But I think, again, it's between the presentation I made around how we see the budget for the next 5 years, the commission teeing up and the further notice, essentially the ultimate question of, is that really enough? We really do not expect the safety net would kick in, but it's there just because, as the chairman said, you really do want to make sure if there ever is a question about having to make a trade-off, of course you got to make sure you're getting to the school first, but that is now just a permanent safety net, and it's actually not something that's going to be revisited every year. Now the second part of it, will there be a different approach to allocating that $1 billion a year? Yes, the commission would have to act again to have the current per pupil per square foot methodology used. If the commission doesn't act again, we'd come back to essentially, I mean, there are current rules that E-rate has around budgets. I mean, you have to have a cost-effective thing, you have to do competitive bidding, so that would be the default. But again, the further notice specifically says, as part of reviewing the long-term funding needs, the commission is going to continue to study that question of what's the right way to allocate those funds. And I actually expect the commission might well act again on it, well in advance of 2 years being up, because of course you want applicants to know what the methodology is going to be.
It's still $150 per student, and the student cap, it's still $150 per student.
Yes, right. So yes, in terms of what the next 2 years for a school, it's a maximum budget of $150 per student for the school or district application. And again, the quite detailed record that we got, including an analysis of applications in recent years, says that $150 per student actually is a pretty generous ceiling. We actually expect that many applications will be below that. But yes, that's what the number was. And then for libraries, it's $2.30 per square foot.
When you guys were crunching the numbers, there's been some concern that's been expressed to me by the education community about that the cost for connectivity to the school is going to increase as time goes on.
Yep.
And part of the fear was that that wasn't included, and that maybe did you guys think about that when you did it?
So that's exactly what the safety net is. That is what the safety net and the further notice just directly addresses that concern. Right. So if
just a couple more.
Yeah. So the answer is yes, and it's those two things. Yeah.
I'm sorry if this is a really stupid question that's missing something that's obvious to everyone else, because I'm not covering this. Someone else is covering it for us, who's not here. But after so you have the extra $2 billion over 2 years. It's coming from this unspent reserve. I understand that. In the third year, you still want to. Your budget hasn't increased except by inflation over the current amount that you're going to be allocating.
Right.
You're done using the extra amount from behind, so you've got $2.4 billion plus inflation.
Right.
Up to this time, demand for priority one services for bandwidth to the schools has grown to such an extent that there's been nothing left for internal connections. How is it that you think that in year 3 there's going to be this target amount of $1 billion left to spend on Wi-Fi?
Because the commission today adopted a phase-out non-broadband services. So pagers, web hosting, traditional phone service. And so we've done that analysis. The savings are $350 million next year, $600 million in year 2, $800 in year 3, $900 in year 4, and $950 and change in year 5. For those first 2 years, we have the $1 billion a year in reserves. By year 3, that's the starting point. And then there's a legitimate question, and Brooks referenced it too. As schools starting to adopt a lot more Wi-Fi, how much more growth will there be? How much efficiencies will we get? That's why the safety net's there, and that's why the further notice is going to really study that. But we're very confident that if nothing else changed, our analysis actually says that there should be $1 billion for year 3 too. But
so remaining priority 1 will just be broadband connections to the school.
Yeah, and that really is the chairman's number 1 overall goal for this order, is truly transitioning the program to be about broadband, which is what those things actually do.
Sorry for missing
No, it's okay.
that.
No, without that missing piece, it's an understandable question. Yeah.
The chairman referred several times to outfitting 10 million students next year with Wi-Fi. Where does that number come from? How do you get there?
So I'm going to give you the one-word answer. It's math, but actually it's the $1 billion at a $150 per student budget, because for the next 2 years, that is how those funds will be distributed. So it's $1 billion a year at $150 per student, $2.30 per square foot for library.
Sure.
And then remember, the other thing with E-rate is, so those numbers are the pre-discount budget. And so then a 90% discount school or an 85% discount school would then get 85% of that, and so there's a sliding scale based on need. That analysis adds up to actually 10.8 million students being served with that $1 billion.
Okay, yeah. So it's a math base.
It's literally,
here's what we could. I didn't know if there was some
math.
further discussion of we talked to people
math.
and this is our.
It's just math of $1 billion using a dollar, $150 per student metric adds up to 10.8 million students. Okay.
Little thing. How does the GSA? How does that component work into this?
Yep. It's going to work. So that's actually not in this order. That's something that we did administratively already. It's going to work just like a master contract. So a lot of schools and libraries in their states have various master contracts for services they can use as the basis for their E-rate application. This is going to work just like another kind of national master contract. It'll be available. It'll be integrated into the USAC website. And as a school, you can basically use that GSA price schedule as your reference point. You could actually say, this is my lowest price service. I want to have that be in my application. Or you can use it as a negotiating point with another provider. That's just a master contract, just a big one.
Last question.
I just had a question to clarify about the per student per square foot. So that is an opt-in for the first 2 years, or how does that work?
Yeah, no. Well, so it's no. That will be how Category 2 will work for the 15 and 16 funding year.
Okay.
Right. I think as a school, you could look at it and go, if you think those budget works for you, you definitely want to do it if you're in need for Wi-Fi. But under the what this order says today, you look at it and say, well, by year 3, there might be a different methodology in place. If I think that, as I said to the other question, hopefully well in advance of that, we would have clear exactly what that would be if it was going to be something different. But right now, as a school, you look at that and say, if I think 150 works for me, next year's a great year to go because there's definitely $1 billion to be used on that basis.
But if you apply for E-rate, you will be judged by that for the first 2 years?
Yes. For the 15 funding year and 16 funding year, this order says for internal connections, your application must be based on a maximum of $150 per student or $2.30 per square foot budget.
And then in year 3, the FCC reviews that approach?
So the FNPRM says we're going to continue to evaluate that approach in the context of long-term funding needs. The commission would have to act again, though, for that approach to carry on to year 3 or beyond.
As you recall in the past, there have been time periods. If you get an internal connection grant at one time, you couldn't get another one for a certain amount of time. Does that still apply?
Right. So that's a good question. So for the next 2 funding years, right? Yes, it is the 150 is essentially a 5-year budget. So for the next, it becomes sort of a 1 in 5 for that, for those funding years.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it.